bit into the, we'll just say for purposes of this video, the questionable financials. So this was an article from Business Insider about Trump's jet. In April, Trump said his private jet LLC was worth no more than $1,000. Then in July, he said it was worth up to $25 million. Why was that? Two sets of Trump's 2023 financial disclosures show vastly different valuations for a number of Trump entities. He's still doing this now, folks, even as the Trump Organization was found guilty of criminal fraud after the Trump Organization was found liable for civil fraud as well in the recent case. Criminal fraud, civil fraud, they're at it again with their finances, or they were always at it, and he will always be at it. The first disclosure filed in April was Trump's required filing as a presidential candidate. The second one in July revised the statements made by the first. The most extreme example is TAG Air Inc. The company is one of a number of Trump entities associated with the former president's Boeing 757. In an April filing, the Office of Government Ethics, Trump claimed that the TAG Air had a value of $1,000 or less. Then in a revised July filing, Trump valued TAG Air at between $5 million and $25 million. So in a mere 3 months that elapsed between the two disclosures, Trump's estimate of TAG Air's value jumped by a factor of 5,000 or more. It's unclear what prompted Trump's accountants to make such a drastic change. I don't know. Perhaps it fits a pattern of his accountants doing things like that. And then it goes to this issue of imputed income and the fact that Donald Trump's political action committees, funded by Mr. and Mrs. Magadonia, are the ones paying Donald Trump's private jet fees and private jet gas bills and all of that. You could take a look at Donald Trump's financial disclosures through his political action committees. Trump 2024 campaign committee brought in $19.1 million in Q4 last year, and there was $1.7 million went to Donald Trump's plane, with another $1.6 million on event staging. Of course, Alina Habba got like $3.5 million for her legal services. Melania got about $500,000 for her hairstylist and for her personal fashion people or whatever. But if you just look at the tax code, imputed income, according to the IRS, is the value of non-monetary compensation given to employees in the form of fringe benefits. And, PACs and super PACs and these political action committees are tax-exempt entities. So it seems like Donald Trump could be using his political action committees as tax avoidance schemes, or just a way to avoid paying taxes so that he can fund things like his own private jet and his wife's hairstylist and things like that. That's always worth just noting too. If you take a look at the income that Donald Trump reported 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, and take a look at the federal taxes Donald Trump paid in these years. In 2015, Donald Trump said he lost $31 million and paid $641,000 in income taxes. In 2016, Donald Trump paid a total of $750 in federal income taxes and claims he lost $32 million. Just think about it. This guy out here saying, I'm such a successful businessman. I almost guarantee you he paid less federal income taxes than you paid. In 2017, Donald Trump says he lost $12 million, lost $13 million, and paid a total of $750 in federal income taxes. 2018 and 2019, Donald Trump claims he paid a combined $1 million in federal income taxes. Then in 2020, he claims he lost $4 million and paid no federal income taxes in 2020. So as we start thinking about Donald Trump's private jet, it raises all of those questions. How else has Donald Trump used that private jet? Well, Now This, and by the way, Now This works with the Midas Touch Network. They have unearthed footage showing Donald Trump. I'll just show it to you. This is from 2007, and this is how Donald Trump was using his private jet back in 2007. Let me show you this exhibit to play this clip.
I have a question. My question is, how many jets do you have, and how would I provide you with flight attendants?
think she's hired. You're hired. I had a case. It was very interesting. A beautiful girl who was 17 or 18 applied to be a waitress. She's so beautiful. She's like a world-class beauty. Like the young lady who just asked a question about the actress. She's so beautiful. And my people came, she said, look, Mr. Trump, she has no experience. So I interviewed her anyway, because she was so good. And I said, let me ask you, do you have any experience? She goes, no, sir. I said, when did you start? You can work with my friend anytime. Hey. Now, she worked with my friend, that's like a death wish for me, right? That's like an alcoholic after your friendship. When people are alcoholics, you put scotch in front of them. It's like, this would be my form of alcoholism. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Now, how else was Donald Trump using his private jet that just recently clipped somebody or clipped another airplane? I want you to watch this credible and detailed first-hand account from Brian Butler, who worked for Donald Trump for decades, about moving classified material after Donald Trump left office into the private jet. So you saw the other clip how Trump's using his private jet. Here's another way how he's using his private jet. Play this clip.
And then what happened is Walt left before me, and he never goes directly to the plane. He's either in the motorcade or when he goes there with the boss, which the former president. And I remember telling him he left the club with, I didn't know what he had in his vehicle, but he waited for me at a nearby business, and I told him I would tell him when I was leaving Mar-a-Lago. So I left Mar-a-Lago, I texted him, hey, I'm on my way. He followed me, he pulled out and got behind me, we got to the airport. I ended up loading all the luggage I had, and he had a bunch of boxes.
You noticed that he had boxes?
Oh yeah, they were the boxes that were in the indictment, the white banker's boxes. That's what I remember loading.
And did you have any idea at the time that there was potentially U.S. national security secrets in those boxes?
No clue. No, I had no clue. I mean, we were just taking them out of the Escalade, piling them up. I remember they were all stacked on top of each other, and then we're lifting them up to the pilots.
How many boxes was it?
You know, they asked me in the interview, and I believe it was 10 to 15 is what I remember. I know
They
it was
being the investigators.
correct.
And when you look back on that now, what do you...
Well, I had no clue until probably the end of June. There was a few different things that happened that kind of opened my eyes to, you know, something's going on here.
So you get that unusual request. Did you ever think to yourself, why were there so many boxes at Mar-a-Lago?
For me, I'm just thinking, the former president, he has a lot of stuff he likes to lug around with him. I never would have thought it was anything like what we see now.
Classified documents.
Yeah, I mean,
How else is Donald Trump using his private jet? This is newly released Trump deposition footage. Well, it was newly released in May of 2023 from the E. Jean Carroll trial, where Donald Trump was found liable of assault, where Trump is saying that he would not have any interest in somebody by the name of Jessica Leeds, a witness in the trial who claimed Trump groped her on an airplane in the late 1970s. And then Donald Trump asks or says to the lawyer that he would not do anything to her because she's not apparently his type either. This is how disgusting he is. And again, we're just talking about responses about airplanes right now and Donald Trump's behavior with airplanes. Play this clip.
Just got in former President Trump's video deposition from last October in E. Jean Carroll's civil case against him. The jury saw this video yesterday, right before both sides rested their case. Let's listen to just some of what the jury listened to.
When you said in that video that Ms. Leeds would not be your first choice, you were referring to her physical looks, correct?
Just the overall, I look at her, I see her, I hear what she says, whatever. You wouldn't be a choice of mine either, to be honest with you. I hope you're not insulted. I would not under any circumstances, have any interest in you. I'm honest when I say it. I would not have any interest in.
This comes as the judge in this case is now giving the former president until 5 p.m. Sunday to decide whether to take the stand after he told reporters yesterday that he's, quote, going back to New York because of the case.
And finally, who does Donald Trump associate himself very closely with? Who's the leader of the MAGA youth movement? Someone named Charlie Kirk. Donald Trump side by side with Charlie Kirk at all of these events. Charlie Kirk is like the leading right-wing influencer voice of the MAGA movement. And again, we're on the theme of airplanes, right? We're just focused on airplanes right now. Charlie Kirk says that African Americans should not be pilots and that he would not go on an airplane if he saw it was the pilot was an African American person. Here, play this clip.
And that's why I think this United story and the DEI story hits so hard, because we've all been in the back of a plane when the turbulence hits, or when you're flying through a storm and you're like, I'm so glad I saw the guy with the right stuff and the square jaw get into the cockpit before we took off, and I feel better now.
No, I mean,
about
like,
that.
you want to go thought crime? Like, I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm gonna be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
Well, that's the you wouldn't have done that. You wouldn't have. You wouldn't have done that before.
That's not an immediate.
No, you wouldn't have done that before.
That's not who I am. That's not what I believe.
It is the reality the left has created.
So I just focused on airplanes. Donald Trump's airplane clipped another airplane, right? And it's a very simple rabbit hole that you can go into. Okay, financial malfeasance and his history about his treatment of women and races. It's all tied into it when you just take a little slice like airplanes. Judge for yourself. Tell me what you think. I'm just giving you data. Just giving you facts. His own words. His own filings. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 3 million subscribers thanks to your support. Thank you so much for watching.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.
Judge Aileen Cannon has indefinitely postponed Trump's Mar-a-Lago documents trial, which is the strongest case against Trump. But don't fret. Let me explain why this is actually good news for Jack Smith and his prosecutors. Really. I'm Dave Ehrenberg, State Attorney for Palm Beach County, aka the Florida Lawman, here on the Midas Touch Network. I want to thank you for all your views, your likes, and your comments. I love reading them. Please keep them coming. And I know a lot of people are upset, and understandably so, that the strongest case against Donald Trump, the Mar-a-Lago documents case, a case where he really has no defense, is now postponed indefinitely by a judge who was appointed by Donald Trump. So obviously, it looks bad. But I'm here to tell you why that this is actually good news for Jack Smith and for the cause of justice, for those who want to see accountability at some point. Well, this case, although it is the strongest case against Donald Trump, was also the least likely to be heard before the election for a few reasons. First, it involves this federal law called CIPA, the Classified Information Procedures Act, which can be complex. It has all these rules, all these challenges, and ability to appeal certain rulings, and it's something that an inexperienced judge like Judge Aileen Cannon was always going to have to deal with and possibly be intimidated by. And I expected that this act, this federal act, and dealing with the former president whose tactics are always delay, would lead to delays. That's what happened. But also, you have a situation where this is a case unlike the DC election interference case, where you have multiple defendants and you have multiple co-defendants also filing all their motions. And then on top of that, you have the fact that Judge Cannon is by herself as an inexperienced judge in the Fort Pierce courthouse, a satellite courthouse where there is no senior judge there. There is no, adult supervision where someone is going to take her by the hand and help her with some of these complex matters. She's on her own. And also some of her law clerks have left for a variety of reasons. So this thing has been beset with delays. Now, that's not to excuse her. A lot of the reasons why there have been so many delays have been her own decisions. to give a lot of deference to Donald Trump, which is odd because you have someone like Judge Cannon, who previously was an AUSA, an assistant U.S. attorney, a federal prosecutor, but she has bent over backwards for this defendant. And we've seen this before with Judge Cannon, because even before there was an indictment in this case, Judge Cannon interjected herself and put a hold on the case and granted this special master request, even going beyond what Trump had asked for, because Trump had asked for the special master but didn't ask for the whole case to be stopped. But she put a hold on the investigation, which is really unusual. I've never seen before a judge get involved in a prosecutor's investigation. This is before any charges were filed. And then Jack Smith took that up to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal. You probably remember where the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, a very conservative appellate court, had a panel of 3 judges, 2 of them appointed by Donald Trump, a third appointed by George W. Bush, who's also Judge Pryor. Judge Pryor is very conservative. And the 3 judges unanimously said, Judge Cannon, you're wrong. You should not have gotten involved and made these rulings, and booted her from this matter. And then the investigation continued. And they repudiated her in no uncertain terms. So she was a bit chastened by that, or at least she should have been. And then the indictment followed, and Jack Smith checked the box on the form to say that this case within the Southern District of Florida should be assigned to the West Palm Beach division, because there's also the Miami division and the Fort Lauderdale one. Well, Jack Smith chose West Palm Beach because that's the one closest to Mar-a-Lago. In the interest of fairness, well, he did that, and luck of the draw got Judge Cannon. And Judge Cannon has been overseeing this case ever since, and she has been giving lots of delays, and I'm not the only one who says that. Check this out. Here's the New York Times. Judge in Trump documents case draws attention for slow pace. Judge Cannon, who has been on the bench for only 4 years, has done herself no favors by allowing a logjam of unresolved issues to build up on her docket. That pileup appears to have kept her from reaching a prompt decision on the timing of the case, even though the defense and prosecution have both informed her that they believe the trial can start this summer. Throughout the case, Judge Cannon has given Mr. Trump's legal team wide berth in defending him, often granting an audience to legal motions that many federal judges would have rejected out of hand or decided on the merits of written filings alone. One of the most surprising hearings she included in her newly issued calendar was a 3-day proceeding in late June to decide who should be considered as part of the prosecution team. In January, Mr. Trump's lawyers filed court papers suggesting that a vast swath of the U.S. national security establishment, including top intelligence and defense officials, were part of the team. Mr. Trump's lawyers were seeking to bolster their defense strategy that members of the so-called deep state had colluded in bringing the classified documents case against Mr. Trump. Judge Cannon also scheduled a separate but potentially explosive hearing in late May to consider arguments about whether Mr. Smith had launched what is known as a selective and vindictive prosecution against Mr. Trump's co-defendant, Walt Nauta. The hearing is likely to include Mr. Trump's own claims of selective prosecution because Mr. Nauta, one of his personal aides, included them in his own filing. So here's the actual ruling by Judge Cannon. She wrote that the court also determines that finalization of a trial date at this juncture, before resolution of the myriad and interconnected pretrial and CIPA issues remaining and forthcoming, would be imprudent and inconsistent with the court's duty to fully and fairly consider the various pending pretrial motions before the court, critical CIPA issues, and additional pretrial and trial preparations necessary to present this case to a jury. The court therefore vacates the current May 20th, 2024 trial date and associated calendar call to be reset by separate order following resolution of the matters before the court, consistent with defendants' right to due process and the public's interest in the fair and efficient administration of justice. So there you have it. And the criticism has been fast and furious. Asharangappa, who's a frequent on-air commentator, says that I think Judge Cannon is intellectually out of her league and is having some weird analysis paralysis because her personal partisanship makes her place Trump's bizarre arguments, like that nuclear secrets are his personal records, on par with Smith's actual legal arguments. She's afraid of making any mistake, lest Smith have a basis to appeal and perhaps get her removed. And so in this lost, ineffective, and paranoid state, the best she can hope for is that Trump gets elected and the case just goes away. So that's her play. whatever her motive, she's been dragging her feet in this case. And as such, this case was never going to be heard before the election. The problem, though, for Jack Smith was that as long as this case had the trial date of May 20th, no other trial could be set on or around that date. And we all knew it wasn't going to take place on May 20th, but Judge Cannon refused to move that date. The fear here is that Judge Cannon would have postponed this trial to later, give a new date, maybe the August date that Trump originally wanted, knowing that it would not really go then, because this case was never going to go before the election. Look how she's slow walking it. So if she would have postponed this trial date to August or September or October, that would have made it impossible for the DC election interference case to take place before the election. And that's why Judge Cannon's decision to indefinitely postpone the Mar-a-Lago documents case is actually good news for Jack Smith, because the last thing that Jack Smith wanted was for this case to be stuck somewhere on a calendar that prevented Judge Chutkan from actually setting the DC election interference case, which Judge Chutkan really does want to go and is waiting on the Supreme Court to green light it. Now, I know that some of you are saying, well, the Supreme Court's not going to green light it. Well, we don't know that. The oral arguments happen, and the court is going to rule. Now, the question is whether the high court sends it back to Judge Chutkan for new findings and it slows it down, or whether they reject Trump's arguments and then says it's game on. But as long as this Mar-a-Lago documents case was set on a calendar, which was a fake date because it was never going to be heard, then it made it a lot less likely that the case that really was going to be heard, the DC election interference case, would go to trial. And that's why this is actually a good thing for Jack Smith. Yeah, you can call this a silver lining, but if you come at it from the perspective that this case was not going to go to trial before the election, but yet it was clogging up the calendar with its current date and potential to move it to a later date that would have obstructed the DC election interference case, you see why it's actually a good thing that the Mar-a-Lago documents case, the strongest case against Trump, is postponed until after the election. So that's why I'm telling you, Midas Mighty, don't fret about this, because you have one case that's definitely being heard before the election, the New York hush money / election interference / falsification of business records case, and you have the DC election interference case, which is still possible. Now, it's a little more likely today than it was yesterday because of what happened in Fort Pierce, Florida. So that's the latest. I'm Dave Ehrenberg. If you like this video, please like it. Leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. I'm the Florida Lawman here on the Midas Touch Network. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.
Day 512 of the Trump trial. Nope, it only feels that way. It's really now going to be Legal AF midweek, the political beatdown edition. Come on, Karen, give me some gloves. She doesn't want to do gloves.
Yeah, right.
Okay, no gloves. There we go. This is the midweek of Legal AF. We're going to talk about what else? The Trump trial. It seems like it sucked all the air out of the room about anything else going on anywhere else anyway. It matters not just to New Yorkers, it matters to the electorate. And Michael Cohen, for as much as we talked about Michael Cohen and we prayed about Michael Cohen's testimony, Michael Cohen did remarkably well in every way, on his direct, in what has been about a third of the way through the cross-examination. And if I were the prosecutors, and I want to ask my friend and colleague and former prosecutor from that office, her opinion about the prosecution. If I were the prosecutors and a little fairy came down and said, "This is what I'm going to give you for the Michael Cohen testimony so far," I would be like, "I'll take it." We'll talk about his testimony, his artful way of handling cross-examination where Todd Blanche, the lawyer for Donald Trump, made it all about him at the beginning and all about the Midas Touch Network and all about our merchandise store, which was an interesting way to start your cross-examination, and then where we think the ball has now landed in the back and forth between these two seasoned trial lawyers, Karen and me, talking about that, and other developments in and outside the courtroom around it as Donald Trump continues to make his trial a campaign rally and a tryout for the vice presidency. You want to be vice president? Come on down and sit in the back of the courthouse and then go outside on the bicycle racks and make statements against the witnesses and the trial judge and the judge's daughter and anything else that you can think of, because the Republicans aren't busy passing any legislation that's helping Americans. So they might as well show up at the Trump trial and do that which Donald Trump has been gagged from doing, which is criticizing live witnesses, especially in real time while they're testifying. And then when we're done talking about how well Michael Cohen is doing, and more importantly than that, or as importantly than that, Michael being one of 12 or 13 witnesses already, how do we think the case is doing? That's what people come to Legal AF for. How's the trial going? How's the prosecution going? What can we glean from what's going on in the room? Do the things that we think are interesting and aren't going well with the jury, are they really not going well with the jury? I don't know. Karen and I'll talk about it. We'll figure it out here on the Legal AF podcast. And then we got to talk about Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani tried in his bankruptcy to have the bankruptcy judge, Judge Lane, who I know, I don't know if Karen knows him, Judge Lane, who's usually no nonsense. And there was a lot of nonsense over the last 4 or 5 months, which I was surprised by. Because as I've said before, there's no federal judge with more powers other than the United States Supreme Court than a federal bankruptcy court judge. It is amazing the powers that they have, inherent authority that they have under the bankruptcy code to do all sorts of things that even regular federal judges can't do. And yet, Rudy Giuliani was just playing fast and loose with the rules again, flouting the orders, flouting the requirements, not filing his financial statements, filing ones that were incomplete, filing bank statements that were for the wrong year, not doing a darn thing to marshal his assets or sell his property and pay the creditors, including the judgment creditors, mother-daughter team Shane Moss and Ruby Freeman, the defamed election workers in Georgia who are holding on to a $148 million judgment running with interest against Rudy Giuliani. And he acts like he doesn't have a care in the world. Get fired from his radio show? Why not? Publish a book about how to go after Joe Biden and the Biden crime family? Sure. Sell an asset? I don't think so. And this was all troubling to any casual observer of bankruptcy processes, let alone the one about Rudy Giuliani. Well, Judge Lane had enough. And he's also had enough with Rudy Giuliani delaying the inevitable, which is paying anything towards the judgment for Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss. We'll cover all of that and so much more on Legal AF, only on the Midas Touch Network, and with my colleague and friend, somebody I'm going to see really soon. I'm really happy about that, Karen Friedman-Ignifilo. Hey, Karen.
Hello. How you doing, Popa?
We're doing great. And thank you for doing this today. I know you're in a sort of cramped quarters there and on the road, and the audience appreciates it. You're getting quite a reputation for the backdrops, whether it be in a moving van hurtling down some New York highway or the Law and Order.
Sorry, I'm moving around so much. I'm just trying to.
Shaky cam. This is shaky cam recording.
Yeah, you know what? Let me put this down right here. There we go.
No problem.
Much better.
But I want people to know, whether she's on the Law and Order set or the back of a van or a taxi cab or a black car hurtling across New York, there's a reason. It's because it's like we're like the postman. Neither rain nor sleet nor dark of night are going to stop Legal AF from going on the air. Whether Karen's doing the morning and afternoon wrap for the New York trial, in between her other gigs and practicing law the way I do. Really, and I just want to tell you, and I'm sure it'll come up in the chat now, I really appreciate everything you do with us and for your personal friendship. I can't express it enough to you.
Oh, thank you, Popok. It means the world to me. Yeah, I mean, look, and I'm very appreciative of you guys so much, but also of all of our listeners, watchers, and followers that, they are so encouraging, and I was so worried at some of the, the train, the car, whatever. And now I'm tragically visiting a family member in the hospital. And, it's one of those things that like either you could not do it or you can do it and not have the best Wi-Fi connection or the best backdrop. But everybody is incredibly supportive of that and understanding and appreciates that we are going to provide the information even in not perfect conditions. So I'm appreciative of you in particular, Popak, for always being so accommodating with time and that sort of thing. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. One of the great, as long as we're continuing to pat each other on the back in the network, one of the great joys of mine has been all of my peers here at the Midas Touch Network, from the brothers. I started my relationship with Ben. It morphed into a relationship with you, and then the brothers, and then the production team, and Salty, and Jeremy, and Sydney, and everybody else who literally drops everything at a moment's notice to jump on, and we cover for each other. You know, Michael Cohen was a little busy yesterday. I don't know if people knew that, and he couldn't do Political Beatdown. And there's Dina Dahl, and continuing the theme. Ben's going to be a little tied up on Saturday for his nuptials, and a number of us are going to be there. Yes, there'll be photos, and I gotta do like the Saturday show with not with the groom to be, but Dina's going to step in because you'll be in the air, and so Dina's going to step in and do it with me on Saturday. But that's the network, man. It's like, we're putting, what was the old, I'm really going to date myself now. What was the old Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney? We're putting on a play. We're putting on a musical. I mean, this is what we do. And so here we are. So let me be very, very mindful of your time, because we do have Karen for a short amount of time today for the reason that she mentioned. So let's dive into the trial. I don't think you and I are going to be opposed or debating this. But let me throw, you and I didn't talk beforehand, so let me throw it out there. I am personally very impressed with Michael Cohen, how he's composed himself, how he's responded to things, the way he's adopted his response technique has been, for me, very honest, very authentic. He admits what he obviously has to, but he does it in a way that I think is almost endearing, especially when by contrast, Todd Blanchard, I think, is doing a terrible job. He made it all about him in the cross-examination. We'll talk about the direct first, but in the cross-examination, it became all about, you don't like me, and you called me a little shit, or whatever he said from social media. That's how he led off things. I would not have led off with that. I would have led off with Michael's well-documented issues in places presided over by judges and in cases to kind of orient the room to who Michael Cohen was. But that's not what they did. They almost, for me, played well into Michael Cohen's hands. And Michael, who I thought did a gentleman's B in testimony in the New York Attorney General civil fraud case. Of course, the result was an A+, $465 million judgment. But I thought Michael himself seemed very nervous in that one, sort of shrunken. But now, for this one, at this moment, all ego laid at the courthouse steps before he entered the room, and just, I thought, did a very, very good job. It's the best job I think the prosecutors could have asked for in putting Michael on. But that's enough about me. Let's turn to you, Karen. What did you think about the direct and Michael's performance, and then where Todd Blanchard looks like he's about a third of his way into his cross-examination? And again, to remind people, we're on a dark day today, a down day today in the trial as scheduled. So he's off on Wednesdays to accommodate Legal AF, I think. And then on top of that, there's like a short day tomorrow, and then there's Barron graduating fundraiser in Minnesota Friday. So we're getting the bulk of what we need to talk about right here on midweek. Go ahead, Karen. Sorry about that.
No, so one of my absolute favorite things about you, Michael Popak, is the sun literally never sets in Michael Popak world. It's true. Everything is always positive. Everything is always great, and it's amazing, actually. And it's a way that I aspire to be, because I'm the one who's always like, well, it's very early. We still have a long way to go.
My co-host, the Grim Reaper.
I know, but it's so, I just love it. It's literally the sun never sets in Popak world or Popak land. Anyway, so it is still early. So I am guardedly optimistic at how Michael Cohen is doing. But it is still very, very early in the cross. And I think that tomorrow's cross-examination is what's going to make or break this case. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Michael Cohen is a critical witness in this case. And the prosecution pre-corroborated absolutely everything they could pre-corroborate, which the direct of Michael Cohen was just brilliant, in my opinion, the way they set this up. And I think they realized that he was going to be key to this case. And so what they did was they pre-corroborated him. The whole beginning of the trial was a setup for his direct examination. All these quote unquote boring witnesses where they introduced phone records and that no one knew what they were about or why they were irrelevant, or text messages or calendar entries, all the things that they had to painstakingly put into evidence. It's boring. It takes time. It interrupts the flow. You don't want to interrupt Michael Cohen's flow by he's telling this really riveting part of the story, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, hold on, directing your, I'd like to show you what's marked for identification as People's Exhibit 53. Do you recognize this? Yes, I do. What do you recognize this to be? Is this a fair and accurate representation of, blah, blah, blah? Is this, it's like, and all of a sudden his flow is interrupted. And all of a sudden you're like going down the rabbit hole of some, phone record that the defense didn't want to stipulate to. Fine. So they did a really smart job at introducing all of that into evidence, which means you don't have to interrupt his flow. It means they're already in evidence. And so, because there's these foundational questions that you have to ask in order to get something into evidence. And that's like, it's like a technicality, but it has to be done. So they did that all in advance through other witnesses. So every time he spoke, and his entire flow of what happened, and they just were like, and okay, is this an example? Is this what you mean when you say that this recording was interrupted by a phone call? Is this the phone call? Is this your phone records? Is this the time that it happened? Okay, great. And so it just kind of showed to the jury, number one, it showed that evidence got to be talked about twice. So that's always a good thing, to reinforce strong evidence to a jury. But number two, it showed that everything he said was corroborated. It's corroborated. It's corroborated. And it's not that corroboration is necessary. If you believe someone and their credibility, that's enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. You don't have to have corroboration in New York State court for a criminal conviction. However, in this particular case, because there are some obvious issues with Michael Cohen's credibility and his bias towards, or against, I should say, Donald Trump, and that there was some extremely obvious to anyone who's a lawyer or a practicing lawyer of what those cross-examination areas would be. And that those were so obvious that the prosecution absolutely predicted every single area and decided to take the sting out of it, decided to deflate the balloon before it could blow up. There's no, aha, isn't it true that you did this, that you did that? It all came out. And the prosecution's not hiding from it. Michael Cohen's not hiding from it. They're like, yes, I did all these things, and I am who I am, just like Stormy Daniels. This authentically owning who she is and not hiding from it, not running from it, not sugarcoating it. And so they set themselves up brilliantly and perfectly. And so I thought the direct of Michael Cohen was just absolutely brilliant on the part of Susan Hoffinger, who has spent most of her career as a trained criminal defense attorney. So I think that gave her a great, she was a prosecutor too early on in her career, but this gave her a great perspective in terms of what the most effective way to present Michael Cohen would be. And because she was a defense attorney for so long, she knows what the cross would be. So she was able to prepare him and prepare herself for what to put into evidence, how to corroborate him, and how to handle all of the issues in the case. Now,
before you move past direct, what was the most compelling one or two, whatever you like? What do you think Susan was able to establish with Michael that resonated with the jury?
That's a great question. I think that what resonated was. It's a great question. I think that the two things. Number one, it was clear through Michael's testimony that of course Trump knew about this, and that wasn't clear before. You know, that wasn't. It was obvious, and there was no other explanation. But it was clear that Trump knew about this. He was intimately involved in all of it. And he caused the falsification of business records to occur. Now, I say the word caused because the other direct and cross-examinations of the other witnesses was all about, well, Donald Trump doesn't know that there's only a drop down of this, not that. You know, there's, you know, and for 5 minutes there, you had some people worried, oh my God, you know, are we going to be able to prove the falsification of business records charge, right? Because that's what this is about in the end. This is about the calling it legal fees when it's not legal fees, when it's, you know, all the actual false entries in the records. And they were doing kind of a decent job at distracting people in terms of, well, how would Donald Trump know that Alan Weisselberg and Michael Cohen decided to call it this or invoice it like that or do it a different way? And that was kind of a good point, right? They did what they needed to do there. And there was a few people who were a little bit concerned, and they were like, oh my God, we have to tie Donald Trump to that. But when you reread the law and you reread the jury charge, it's not just making the false entry. It's also if you cause the false entry to be made. And Michael Cohen did a brilliant job, I think, on direct at closing that small gap and showing that this absolutely, without a doubt, they could have easily just paid back the $130,000, right?
Right.
And this wouldn't have been a crime. You know, just pay him back. Let Michael pay it back. It's an NDA, whatever, and then you're done. But no, they decided they wanted to hide it. They didn't want to have to declare it to the campaign. They didn't want to have to pay taxes on it. They didn't want to have it tied back to Donald Trump. And so what did they do? They structured it so that we're going to, you know, call it legal payments. We're going to gross it up for the income. We're going to, you know, set it up so that you pay it back over time and call it something different. You know, they even have this, you know, I think it was Exhibit 35 and Exhibit 36 was like the best exhibit I've ever seen, 2 exhibits I've ever seen in my life. Like, when do criminals actually draw a picture with flowcharts and call it like,
here's the bank. You're sitting in the getaway car. You open the vault.
Exactly.
hand me the cash.
Exactly. So yes. So
well,
that's
let me jump in on with you. This is exactly this attempted sleight of hand of trying to make it look like Alan Weisselberg, who we'll talk about him in a minute, and Michael Cohen went rogue and did this of their own accord, out of the goodness of their heart, to pay off Stormy Daniels and record it in the books and records without the boss knowing. They tried this sleight of hand, this magic trick, in front of the jury 2 years ago, when Susan Neckles was also the lawyer for the Trump Organization major subsidiaries for tax fraud and business record fraud. And the jury came back with a 17-count conviction because they didn't buy that. So the fact that they're trying to pull this elephant out of a hat again and try to make it look like, well, Donald Trump is just so busy that he would never know. Right. We're not saying he pulled out a pen and entered it into the books. We're saying that, as you said, he caused it, a part of the conspiracy, led the conspiracy to do all of this. Did you have another direct gold nugget that got developed by Susan Hoffinger and Michael?
I mean,
There's so many.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many. You know, I think what Michael Cohen really did a great job is painting the urgency around the election. In other words, if there was any doubt that this was election related, there's no doubt that this was about the election and only about the election. And I thought Michael Cohen did a really great job at again eliminating
I agree with
this
you.
about Melania part.
If he did nothing else, tying Donald Trump as the leader of that conspiracy to cause those books and entries, and then the second crime, right, the second shooter, the election interference, which they have to prove in order to make the felony, that's Michael Cohen. I mean, that's why Alvin Bragg finally had to get right with Michael after he wasn't originally, when Mark Pomerantz was pushing him, about having Michael have to prove some fundamental elements of the crime. Let's switch to Cross. I have to laugh already. Oh, Todd Blanche, why don't you outline from your perspective the cardinal sins and violations of cross-examination 101 that Todd Blanche committed in front of the jury, and then how Michael Cohen is artfully handling that cross-examination, with the caveat, I agree with you, we're only a third of the way up the mountain. We're not even at base camp 3. I get you, and we got to get to the top of Mount Everest. There's a long way to go without oxygen. But how do you like the approach so far and how Michael's doing?
So there's great lawyering, there's good lawyering, there's bad lawyering, and then there's ineffective assistance of counsel, which can cause a reversal. Just to give you the whole scale of where lawyers
I thought you were going to end with, and then there's Todd Blanche.
No, no, I'm giving you the whole scale. Had Donald Trump gone with Alina Habba, for example, as his lawyer in a criminal case and was convicted, I actually think they could be set up for an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. That's where I think she falls, that type of lawyer. And I just think she really is not qualified to be a criminal defense attorney based on what I've seen in her other civil matters. And then you have really good lawyering, and I think the surprise really, really good lawyer that I've seen so far is Emile Beauvais. He's done a few cross-examinations. He's surgical. He gets in and out. He's effective. And, he's
for those that are tuning in, Trump's lawyer that is the partner colleague of Todd Blanche in their office. Yeah.
Yes. And he's not considered one of the lead lawyers. He was someone no one had ever really known of as a criminal defense attorney, whereas Todd Blanche and Susan Nicholas are well known and have really good reputations amongst defense attorneys. But I think Emile Beauvais is doing a really good job, actually, and is kind of rising up as this good defense attorney cross-examiner. Susan Nicholas, when she cross-examined Stormy Daniels, I thought it was not her best cross. And I got the impression, because of what I think the tactical mistakes that were made, if I were a defense attorney now, I'm thinking about it from that perspective, I got the impression that was largely driven by the client, because I think she's good enough that if she were permitted to do her own tactical cross-examination, I don't think she would have gone into certain areas that she went into or taken a different tactic. I could be wrong. I don't know. It just seemed like she's better than what I saw there. And then we get to Todd Blanche and Michael Cohen. And again, it's early. He has all of today to prepare because there's no court on Wednesday. So we'll see what happens Thursday. But I mean, there is a cross-examination of Michael Cohen that is blistering and, frankly, potentially devastating to the prosecution. And Todd Blanche didn't even scratch the surface. In fact, if anything, he started out in the weirdest way. He made it personal, which, you don't ever want it to be personal. That's very strange. It's almost like you're pitting your credibility against the witness to the jury, and that's not at all. It shouldn't be about you. And he asked Michael Cohen. He started it with, you called me some name, and I can't remember what it was. And Michael Cohen's like, yeah, sounds like something I would do, like a dipshit or something like that. I don't remember, but like, you have something against me, like. You never make it personal. Or a prosecutor. That's just not
Mary, there's a great question.
Appropriate, and it's more importantly not effective. And then he, look,
and the judge sustained what's his name? Blanche got 3 objections out of the first 2 questions, and they both got shut down. He knows better than that. But go ahead.
No, and also when the transcript came out later, because they were up at sidebar, when the transcript came out later, apparently Judge Merchan was talking about, like, don't make this personal. What the heck? Like, even Judge Merchan was surprised by this. So, yeah, it's totally, totally bizarre. And I just don't think, he went right into this whole, first of all, he then started talking about Midas Touch, right? And the Midas Touch Network and, his podcast. And he
Which
got
we appreciate.
we appreciate, but he got some basic facts wrong that,
Yeah.
anyone should be able to tell what it is. And Michael Cohen corrected him. He attributed our merch store, for example, to Michael Cohen, and it wasn't. Go ahead.
Sorry. No. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It had nothing to do with him. And the reason that's significant is it makes you look bad to the jury. It's like, well, when you're using something to cross-examine someone, and let's say they don't come clean, you want the jury to think you're right and they're wrong. But if you got it wrong, that's not good. You lose credibility to the jury. And don't forget, he's already lost credibility with the judge.
How do you get such fundamental things wrong? And then you've gone, first mistake, I agree with you, was going down the rabbit hole of let's go over all of your TikToks and all of your social media postings about my client. And let's get into, von Schitzenpants and turds and orange dust and whatever Michael likes to use on his things, which is very entertaining. That's not where I would have started. But by the way, as long as we're talking about, because people are now interested, and and as I joked on my X post recently, welcome Todd Blanche, our new head of marketing for Midas Touch. So we do have an actual Midas Touch store.com. Thank you, Salty. Right, you know where my head was going. So if you want to buy the stuff that only Michael Cohen has talked about and Todd Blanche doesn't understand, go to store.midastouch.com. You can get all of our Legal AF stuff and Convict 45 and all the rest of the stuff that now is part of legal lore. But I digress. In fact, Karen, when we come back, let's talk about not only the cross, but as you started to do, what the impact is going to be so far on the jury of Michael's testimony, what he's testified to, and the beginning of the cross. Maybe Todd Blanche can recover, maybe. Or maybe because of what you said earlier about Susan Necklace and he being warped and influenced by a greater force, which is their client, about how to conduct this trial, because Donald Trump's track record as a trial lawyer is so enviable. I mean, he's 0-80. He's lost every grand jury and juror that he's ever faced for hundreds of millions of dollars. But sure, he's paying the bills. I'm sorry, his followers are paying the bills. So listen to him. We'll talk about all that and more. But first, a break for our sponsors.
Have you ever wished you had whiter and brighter smile? Well, before you visit a dentist, you should know that their whitening treatments can be very expensive, and it's not just the price. You also have to book an...
I almost said Donald Trump. It's the same guy. When will Steve Bannon report to the Bureau of Prisons and start his sentence? Not if, when. We break it all down for you right here on the Midas Touch Network and on Legal AF. Take a listen.
Of Steve Bannon. Take it away.
Cannon to Bannon. Let's talk about it. Steve Bannon's one step closer to serving 4 months for obstructing Congress twice when he refused to both testify and provide documents to the Jan 6 committee, a legitimate committee of Congress. There is a body of law in the D.C. Court of Appeals that has never been overturned from 1962 or so, called Licavoli, named after a case there, which basically sets out that if you, the willfulness requirement, that if you refuse you don't have a proper defense to comply with the subpoenas, that you have committed a crime. And there's only two ways that a precedent, as Judge Garcia, who I was very impressed by, Brad Garcia, a Biden appointee, but had argued 20 or 30 cases before the D.C. Court of Appeals and the United States Supreme Court before, even though he's relatively young. I think he's a potential shortlister for Biden in the second term for Supreme Court. It's it's hard to believe, first Latino on the D.C. Court of Appeals. He pointed out there's only two ways, and neither of which apply here. One, the United States Supreme Court in the intervening 50, 60 years says something differently than they ever have. Or there's an en banc, meaning the entirety of the DC Court of Appeals makes a ruling that reverses Licavoli. And that hadn't happened either. So it's a stubborn little thing to have a piece of precedent that's completely against you in a district court, as Steve Bannon just found out. And you can't just will it away or wave your hand around or your brief around and hope it doesn't apply to you. David Schein is the lawyer for Steve Bannon, was the lawyer for Donald Trump in one of his impeachment hearings. I don't think he covered himself in any great glory. And what Brad Garcia, the judge, pointed out is that you're relying on the executive privilege. But your evidence for that is an inconclusive letter from one of Donald Trump's lawyers to you, Justin Clark, in which Justin said to you, some of what you may be required to testify about and or produce some be subject to the privilege. It didn't tell him what. It didn't order him not to, and Trump never intervened to assert the privilege on behalf of Bannon. Remember, Bannon was only in the White House for a short amount of time as a senior advisor, years before Jan 6th. And all the Jan 6th committee is investigating is Jan 6th and things leading up to it. That's not my fault. And you talked a little bit about real life knowing Michael. My wife and I, as people know, were in DC 2 weeks ago for a personal trip just to see the city. And we stopped to go to the bathroom at the Willard Hotel, which is where the war room was, led by Bannon and Mike Flynn and Rudy Giuliani, where they set up shop in order to coordinate what was happening on Jan 6th to try to stop the peaceful transfer of power. You and I in our audience didn't put Steve Bannon in that room after he had left office, after he'd left the West Wing. He did. And as a citizen Bannon, podcaster at best. And so the reason people are frustrated, the point I want to make I'm at a hot take. I'm on a hot take roll. The point that the takeaway here is the following. Judge Nichols, Carl Nichols, as long as I'm being consistent, a Trump appointee, who actually had a good reputation before he got on the bench down in D.C. for the firms. I think he worked for Williams and Connolly. He, despite the Licavoli precedent that I just talked about, he thought that there was enough issues here about the application of potential immunity defenses, maybe reliance on advice of counsel defenses, and because the sentencing that he gave him was so short, 4 months, he's let him for almost a year and a half, almost 2 years, be out and not have to report and serve. He would have already served the time. He'd be a year and a half beyond it. It's taken us that long. This is 2022 when it starts, 2024 now. So that's why he's been able to podcast incessantly and attack everything and everybody and attack the case. But now the moment of truth. This 3-judge panel unanimously ruled, led by Judge Garcia, that Licavoli applies, that he willfully violated both of those subpoenas. So he's 2-count loser, and confirmed and affirmed his felony conviction by the jury and ultimately the sentencing of the 4 months by Judge Nichols. And even when they got to the counsel part, they said, I don't know, even that seems pretty weak that you were relying on counsel, that's in good faith. Now, what Bannon tried to do is create new law. He wanted to argue that bad faith and good faith are a component of the elements of the crime. And he's trying to argue he had good faith because Justin Clark, the lawyer for Trump, told him he may have some immunity issues or privilege issues. And I don't think any of that actually shows good faith, but he's trying to graft onto the law this heightened requirement of showing bad faith on the part. And the judge said, no, that's why Congress invented the word willful. We're not adding another on top of willful. We're not adding bad faith and good faith. That's not really in the criminal code that way. And we're not going to make that now. So what's the next step? He's still out. He'll try and appeal, I assume, to the full en banc, all of the judges of the DC Court of Appeals. But he's got to get like 11 people to agree with that, and he's not going to. So they're going to reject the en banc, I'm sure, because there's not enough votes to think that anything's interesting or wrong about what Judge Garcia for the 3-judge panel already did. We know those 3 judges are voting against an en banc ruling. And so he's not going to get en banc. And then we got to see, you and I are. It's always white knuckle, my phrase for today, to see what the United States Supreme Court does. First stop on that train is going to be a writ of certiorari appeal and an emergency stay, so he doesn't have to go to jail, report to jail, to the United States Supreme Court through Chief Justice Roberts, who sits over the D.C. Court of Appeals as the duty judge, if you will. And then Roberts is going to decide it on his own, which is the shadow docket, which he's allowed to do, reject it, done. Or he turns it over to the full 9, where we know mischief will happen. And the question is there a right-wing majority to overturn Licavoli, to undermine the power of Congress, another branch, to issue subpoenas that have teeth in them or not? Generally, the Supreme Court stays out of political questions and things that impinge on the powers of a co-equal branch of government. This MAGA right wing, your guess is as good as mine as to whether they're going to think it's interesting enough to because in order to do it, though, they'd have to completely rip away a 60-year precedent. But this Supreme Court is very good at ripping away 60-year precedents. I mean, the Dobbs decision, taking away a woman's constitutional right to choose and have bodily autonomy, they didn't have any problem with that. So this is even less than that. But we'll have to see that. But that's the next steps. In the meantime, he stays out, he podcasts. But at some point soon, either the Supreme Court stays the conviction, or he has to report to the bureaus of prisons and the presiding Judge Nichols to have him go to prison and start the 4-month sentence.
Recently with Peter Navarro, who was also held in contempt of Congress and was convicted, he went to the Supreme Court, perhaps a slightly different issue, but then directly on point with Licavoli, as you just mentioned. But the Supreme Court there denied his emergency petitions, multiple emergency petitions. I expect, I think that Bannon's going to be reporting to prison pretty soon.
I agree with you.
But we will keep you posted, and we'll leave it on that note. Bannon reporting to prison pretty soon.
Welcome back. That was Legal AF. Join us on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on this YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll tell you why we call it Legal AF. You could probably figure it out. We curate the top stories at the intersection of law and politics, and the lawyers who host Legal AF are all practicing lawyers. Lawyers talking about things that they know what they're talking about. Holy cow, how refreshing. You know about Legal AF and you're already part of our audience. We really appreciate you. Seriously, you're helping us build this network with our collective bare hands, and we appreciate you. Send that clip, though, that Legal AF After Dark. Send it off to friends and family, people in your life, and ask them to, take a flyer, take a leap of faith, join our audience. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about at this point, I'm Michael Popok, and that was Legal AF, and we invite you to join us for our next podcast, Wednesdays and Saturdays, right here on this network. So until my next hot take, until my next podcast, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.
Well, Donald Trump's red necktie friends, who Alex was just talking about, came to the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse this week to praise one of the criminal defendants in the building and to attack District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who Donald Trump falsely accuses of spending all of his time and resources on the prosecution of Donald Trump.
For People versus Harvey Weinstein, we are moving forward in that matter. We intend to retry it, and for those of you who were in court saw that the court set sort of a window for a trial in the fall. So we are already moving forward with that matter, having conversations with survivors, centering their well-being, and pursuing justice. We are here now because the work of the office goes on in so many ways. As those of you who cover the office know, the breadth of our work, and that work continues. We have the expertise and resources to take on tough cases while driving down crime alongside our law enforcement partners. That includes, over the past 2 years, driving shootings down 48% in Manhattan, murders down 17%, burglary down 31%, and overall index crimes down 7%, outpacing the citywide decline of 0.6%.
And that is but a tiny sample of the work that District Attorney Alvin Bragg is doing every day with his team of more than 500 prosecutors handling more than 35,000 active cases every year. If those Republican candidates for vice president really support law enforcement, they would have come to New York to congratulate Alvin Bragg. Just when you thought a presidential debate that includes Donald Trump couldn't become more ridiculous, it has. President Joe Biden will be debating Donald Trump with one hand tied behind his back, legally. Donald Trump will, in the debate studio, will be claiming that every criminal prosecution Donald Trump faces is being run by Joe Biden. Donald Trump says that every day. Everyone has heard that before, and we will hear it again on the debate stage, and the moderators will do nothing to contradict that because, in their traditional view, that will be Joe Biden's job. Debate moderators will use the standard playbook of allowing the other candidate to answer accusations made by the opposing candidate. But what will Joe Biden be able to say about the prosecutions of Donald Trump? Maybe nothing. Because presidents not named Trump never comment on pending criminal cases. Prior to Donald Trump, the most famous and possibly only instance we had of this was when President Richard Nixon said in 1970 that Charles Manson was guilty of mass murder in the Hollywood Hills of actress Sharon Tate and 7 other people.
I noted, for example, the coverage of the Charles Manson case when I was in Los Angeles. Front page every day in the papers. It usually got a couple of minutes in the evening news. Here is a man who was guilty, directly or indirectly, of 8 murders without reason.
The problem was Charles Manson wasn't guilty yet. President Nixon said that in the middle of the Manson family trial. The Manson criminal defense lawyers immediately asked for a mistrial because of the president's undue influence on the jury. Nixon made the statement just before boarding Air Force One in Denver to fly back to Washington, and as soon as the plane landed at Andrews Air Force Base, White House staff issued this written statement by the President of the United States. To set the record straight, I do not know and did not intend to speculate as to whether the Tate defendants are guilty in fact or not. All of the facts in the case have not yet been presented. The defendants should be presumed to be innocent at this stage of their trial. The next day, at the defense table, defendant Manson held up for the jury a Los Angeles Times headline saying, "Manson guilty, Nixon declares." The New York Times reported, Superior Court Judge Charles Older took immediate steps to forestall a mistrial by questioning the jurors individually about whether the incident had prejudiced them. All but one of the 12 regular jurors and 6 alternates testified that they had witnessed Manson's action, but they all said they could act impartially. One man said he hoped he could. Just before the session ended, Judge Older also sentenced a defense lawyer, Day Shin, to county jail for 3 nights on contempt charges for putting newspapers on the counsel table where Manson could get at them. And the judge asked each juror to swear under oath that they would be able to reach a verdict based solely on the evidence presented in the courtroom. Joe Biden remembers the 2 days in 1970 when the President of the United States almost derailed Charles Manson's murder trial. Everyone in high school or older in the United States at that time remembers it. Joe Biden is a more careful person and a more careful lawyer than Richard Nixon. Joe Biden has not said anything about the overwhelming evidence against Donald Trump in the criminal charges that he faces for violations of the Espionage Act and illegal possession of classified material. Joe Biden has said nothing about the overwhelming evidence in the indictment of Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. for conspiracy against the United States of America, a conspiracy to defraud the United States of America by illegally changing the results of the presidential election. Joe Biden has said nothing about the criminal charges Donald Trump is facing in Georgia, where Donald Trump was recorded on the phone demanding that the Georgia Secretary of State change the vote count in the presidential election. Any other candidate running for president against Donald Trump could attack Donald Trump in a presidential debate on every one of those cases, as long as that candidate running against Donald Trump were not the president of the United States. News coverage of Donald Trump has worn out the word unprecedented. But here we are tonight, at the end of a full day of news coverage of what will be the Biden-Trump debates, and the news media still hasn't even realized how unprecedented those debates will be this time because of the criminal indictments facing Donald Trump. There will be a nominee in the debate facing at least 3 indictments who will already have been convicted or found not guilty in an earlier trial happening now in New York City. If there is a hung jury in the Manhattan trial and the district attorney announces that he is going to pursue a retrial of Donald Trump on those same charges, then Joe Biden won't be able to talk about that case either. A so-called debate that was already going to be ridiculous is going to be even more preposterous. It will be the theater of the absurd. Joe Biden won't just have one hand tied behind his back. He will be put in a legal straitjacket. And the unfair benefit to Donald Trump is enormous. Joe Biden is a good lawyer who could rip up Donald Trump in a debate just talking about the criminal indictments against Donald Trump alone. Instead, we will see the latest version of the standard TV debate format, which is already problematic to the point of absurdity. I've seen every televised debate in presidential history. That's how few of them there have been. Most presidents were elected without debating anyone. That's how unnecessary presidential debates are. I was a little kid sitting on the floor of the living room in Boston watching the very first televised presidential debate between Vice President Richard Nixon and that Boston boy, Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy. I was in college the next time they had a presidential debate, 16 years later, in 1976, between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. Televised debates are not a mandatory part of presidential campaigning. They are a show created by and for television. They did not exist before television. No one thought they were necessary. The historically famous Lincoln-Douglas debates were not presidential debates. They were debates for an Illinois Senate campaign, which Abraham Lincoln lost. The television version of debate doesn't actually test presidential skills. In the rooms where presidents govern, they are never told. They only have 2 minutes to respond to what someone just said in that room. Presidents never have to make decisions alone. Presidents always have expert advice available to them, as much advice as they want or need. No one has ever run into the Oval Office and said, "Mr. President, you have 30 seconds to respond." Never. And they never will. Nothing presidential is actually being tested in the phony debates that the television industry pretends are invaluable, because they're really good for the television industry. Candidates standing there alone on a debate stage answering questions about how they will govern is an entirely fictional television construct of how presidents actually do their work. You don't need to remember everything about the tax code or the throw weight of missiles, the Social Security trust funds all the time when you're president. If a president struggles to remember a name or a number in the Oval Office, no one snaps at him, no one panics, no one thinks the president is losing it. Every professional working with a president, a serious president, knows that every president not named Trump has the largest range of governing information and responsibility in his head of anyone in that room. Everything from agriculture policy to the latest terrorist threat. If the FAA director comes into the Oval Office to talk about the stress of overburdened air traffic controllers, the FAA director expects to know and should know a lot more than the president knows about that particular subject. That's why he's there, to help the president. But if, say, when the FAA director is walking into the Oval Office, he sees the CIA director leaving, the FAA director should assume that she's talking to a president who might be distracted by something much more serious and darker that he just heard from the CIA director than what the FAA director is now there to discuss. But the televised presidential debate turns on the childish notion that the president is supposed to know everything all the time about everything. And he is supposed to state the most important points about everything in 2 minutes to an audience that has a tiny fraction of understanding of what a knowledgeable, serious president knows. What you want is a president who can think. And they almost never have to think quickly. So you want a president who can deliberate and think carefully. And they absolutely never have to think alone. What you want is a president who has demonstrated the ability to find the best choice in the agonizing presidential situations of having no good choice. None of the presidential debate moderators, all of whom are very good at their work, have ever seen a presidential decision made. They have never been in the room where that happens when it happens. They have never seen a presidential decision on its way to being made. They have no idea how many weeks or years of thinking by the president and the people around him shaped that presidential decision that is announced to them in a White House press briefing. That is in no way a criticism of the moderators announced today for the CNN debate and the ABC debate, each of whom will definitely do a better job than I could ever do in that situation. But there is nothing the moderators can do to fix the conceptual flaw in the very notion of televised presidential debates. The flaw that was there at the birth in 1960, when the television business decided to pretend that the presidential debate could actually be a window into how the potential president would actually do his work. Joe Biden started all this morning with this.
Donald Trump lost 2 debates to me in 2020. Since then, he hadn't shown up for debate. Now he's acting like he wants to debate me again. Well, make my day, pal. I'll even do it twice. So let's pick the dates, Donald. I hear you're free on Wednesdays.
That was at 8 a.m. And then 2 hours and 14 minutes later, at 10:14 a.m., Joe Biden announced, "I've received and accepted an invitation from CNN for a debate on June 27th. Over to you, Donald. As you said, anywhere, anytime, any place." Half an hour later, Donald Trump accepted the June 27th CNN debate invitation. And then, an hour later, Donald Trump posted on social media his accepting a September 10th invitation for an ABC television debate. 2 minutes later, Joe Biden officially accepted the September 10th ABC debate invitation in a tweet. The Biden campaign laid down a set of conditions for debates this morning. The debates should be one-on-one, allowing voters to compare the only 2 candidates with any statistical chance of prevailing in the Electoral College and not squandering debate time on candidates with no prospect of becoming president. The moderators should be selected by the broadcast host from among their regular personnel so as to avoid a ringer or partisan. There should be firm time limits for answers and alternate turns to speak, so that the time is evenly divided and we have an exchange of views, not a spectacle of mutual interruption. A candidate's microphone should only be active when it is his turn to speak to promote adherence to the rules and orderly proceedings. Good luck with that.
We are joined now by Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell, who was also at the courthouse today.
Yeah, and look, the simple scorecard reporting is not a single point, relevant point, was scored against Michael Cohen on cross-examination. To everyone's surprise, the demeanor held up, because that was the suspense of last night. The suspense was, wow, that's the most remarkable version of Michael Cohen we've ever seen. You know, those of us who watched him in the courtroom yesterday. But can he do it on cross when he's challenged? He's such a defensive guy. He's such a combative guy in every other environment. But he was contained, as most people are, by the pressures and the confines of the courtroom, especially the witness stand. You know, you got to remember that when lives end up in a criminal courtroom and you are the key witness for a criminal prosecution, yours is a broken life, because you are here as the eyewitness to your friend's murder, and you are part of a tragedy yourself. And so Michael Cohen's life was broken by all of this. And what you saw on the witness stand was this broken man. And I love some of what we saw from the courtroom art. There's the capturing of Michael Cohen's mournful face, which is what this was. This was someone mourning for his own mistakes, mourning for his own terrible mistakes that he's made in his life, and then describing eventually what was a family intervention to get him to turn away from what was literally his life of crime with Donald Trump and save what could be left of his life by the simple course of telling the truth to prosecutors. Doing time in prison, it turns out, is going to be a consequence of this. And, you know, and Chris, one thing I'd say about Michael Cohen's pauses on answering questions is I took every one of those to actually be a smart moment. And that just might be, you know, the jury won't be thinking the way I am about it, but having seen a lot of witnesses, especially lawyer witnesses, what he's doing is he's listening to every word you just said and deciding how to answer it, whether he should answer it, whether he should ask for clarification. And it never felt to me like there was something weird about the pause, but it could to a jury who doesn't know that that's what I see going through his mind.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of this, there's a little bit of this thing happened having been through depositions. You know, there's a little bit of this, a question is asked, and you sort of quibble the characterization, so you brush it back a little bit. And so then Blanche comes back. Said, at one point there was a big standoff. We said, was that a lie? He says, well, it wasn't truthful. Yes, but was it a lie? Well, if you want to call it a lie. He's like, I'm not asking if you want me to call it a lie. I'm asking if you call it a lie. So there's a few of those standoffs. But again, yes, I think that was intentional on Cohen's part, right? Because he is a lawyer, he is being careful, and he does understand the weight. And I think that last point, you know, the weight of all this, which again, when we were talking yesterday and everyone was talking, is like, is this going to last? It was very clear today, that kind of spectral presence that he had, this sort of gaunt, broken guy who's, you know, that remained throughout. Rachel, obviously, you were following Wrapped closely today, I'm sure. What was your big takeaway?
My big takeaway was, is this all there is from the defense? I mean, I think that, you know, the defense is under no obligation to put any witnesses forward at all. Lawrence has been very articulate and persuasive in saying that there's 0% chance that they will put the defendant, that they will put their own client, Donald Trump, on the stand in his own defense. But we don't know if they'll put anybody. And so if they don't, this is their defense. The cross-examination of Michael Cohen is the defense's case. And to get what Blanche was able to get out of him today, there was nothing, which either makes me feel like they must be incredibly confident in their ability to try to get a mistrial ruling here, or something surprising is going to happen on Thursday, or they just didn't bring it, because there really was nothing, especially when you consider that when the prosecution laid out their case at the outset, they basically said this is a documents case. We are going to put Michael Cohen on the stand. He's a very controversial guy, and for good reason, and you're going to hear about why. But everything that we are going to need to prove to you in order for you to come back with a guilty verdict will be bolstered by corroborating evidence, by multiple witnesses, and by documents. And thus far, they've spent the last couple of weeks doing that, giving all the documents, authenticating all the documents, giving all the corroborating witness testimony. They get to their culminating witness, Michael Cohen, and he performs perfectly as a witness for them. He doesn't lose his cool, as you guys were saying. He answers all the right questions. He doesn't seem to, go into weird soliloquies or sidebars that might be picked apart on cross-examination. They hand him over to the defense today after lunch. And I have to tell you, I was on tenterhooks. I thought this was it. This is how we're going to see it. They're going to keep Donald Trump out of prison. And it was just nothing. So maybe Thursday's going to be something, but otherwise it looks like they're just not mounting a defense at all.
I was struck by the same thing. Not only that's, where's the beef, but also the sort of spaghetti against the wall nature of the line of questioning from the defense, Rachel. Just they tried to paint Cohen as a bunch of different things, an unreliable narrator or a grifter or, someone who was in it for himself, selfish.
Or a spurned lover, basically.
Someone who was obsessed with Donald Trump, and then when he was cast aside for, not getting a position in the White House, not getting Reince Priebus's job, he was, intent on destroying Donald Trump. Did you find any of those characterizations particularly effective?
I might have found any one of them effective had the prosecution not laid all of them out in advance to tell us, put them all in context and tell us all what they mean. I mean, I didn't know that Michael Cohen had called the defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, a crying little swear word. The very first thing that he led with, I didn't know that he had, complained about Trump's defense lawyers in a TikTok video or something. That was new. Okay, is that going to change my view about what Michael Cohen brings to this case? No. But the prosecution did a good job at eliciting from all of the other witnesses, oh, yeah, I couldn't stand Michael Cohen. Oh, yeah, Michael Cohen called himself a lawyer. Michael Cohen, a fixer. He only fixes things that he broke. And we got all of this stuff, all of the ad hominem, anything you could want about Michael Cohen we've already had. And then they put it all in context. Here's what he was when he served Donald Trump. Here is when he stopped serving Donald Trump. Here is what he has done since. Here are the sins he has committed and the way he has atoned. It's all been out there in advance. So for Todd Blanche to be up there as Donald Trump's defense lawyer saying, oh, but Michael Cohen, didn't you lie to Congress? The jury must be sitting there thinking, yeah, we heard the explanation for that already, and we know what that is. Why are you bringing it up again?
The thing that struck me today on that point, on the cross, is, again, I do think there are plausible stories to tell here. Like, for instance, right, when they're spending a lot of time on his podcast, and the fact that you sell, there's a moment where all the different merchandise you sell on your website or your associated website to show Donald Trump in prison and send him to the big house, not the White House. And is that about President Trump? And yes, it is. Okay. There's a story that tells that this guy is so out for revenge, he's going to say whatever it takes to put him behind bars, which is what's being implied. But that part at least was legible to me. There were large parts of the cross today that I could not follow. And I think I'm pretty good at following stuff generally. I followed the direct. And part of this, I'll just say, is like a small color thing. And this is something we can talk about with our legal experts, if Lawrence, you want to weigh in. In the direct, all of the evidence is being put up for all of us to see, which is extremely helpful because you see the documents. Here's the pay stub for your mayonnaise. During the cross, when they would present a document to Michael Cohen to refresh his memory, it was not admitted into evidence broadly, which means he's looking at a screen. You don't see what the document is. Again, this is intentional. And it means that it's really hard to follow the whole thing. There were long lines of questioning where I was like, I'm just lost here.
What are you talking about?
I was like, what are we doing with the phones? Right. Why are we on the phone still? I don't get the phones thing.
And it got a little worse because Michael Cohen's looking at a document that none of us can see, and he's saying, you are misrepresenting what's on this document. Okay, so it's not working on any level. But hey, welcome to the representation of a guilty client. This is what it looks like when a criminal defense lawyer has a client who did exactly what Stormy Daniels says he did. This is what it looks like when you're representing a client who did indeed conspire to create false business records. They don't have, if they had something better, you would have heard it in the first 10 minutes. They don't have anything better. You're not going to hear anything better. And the game is, and it's a legitimate legal game, is they're going to try to create not just reasonable doubt, but presidential level reasonable doubt. They're going to want you to bring a higher level of reasonable doubt here, because this man was president, so you can't possibly convict him on the word of that man.
Right.
It was the analysis of some of our legal experts and friends that Stormy Daniels performed better on cross. So are they not strong at cross? I mean, do we have a pattern here yet?
Well, I think it's a combination of sort of on direct for Stormy Daniels. I think you have to remember it's a high-profile matter for both the prosecutor. It's not every day that you have this searing spotlight. For Stormy Daniels, it's not every day that not only are you testifying under oath in a criminal case, but a searing spotlight. So you can understand why direct, which should be sort of the easiest, can be rocky for the witness and the prosecutor. I've not been in with this amount of scrutiny, but I can tell you, I used to say a high-profile case brings out every flaw you have, and if you have a lot like me, that's a lot to bring out. And and for a witness, just think about Stormy Daniels, who might have may not be proud of everything in her life, and certainly for Michael Cohen, who has to admit a lot. It's difficult. So there's a reason direct can sometimes be stilted, but I think Stormy Daniels on cross was. I mean, I'm sure Susan Nicholas isn't going to like hearing this, but I think Susan Nicholas humanized her and allowed her to speak, and she was more comfortable. And I think that happens when you have another day to sort of relax. I think that Michael Cohen, having heard him live on, I thought he was sort of remarkably good. I also think people should, stop saying, oh, he's a different person. Lawrence O'Donnell made this point. When you're in court under oath, you are a different person. It is a different circumstance. Yeah. You act differently. I've been a witness sometimes. You take that oath so seriously. It is you are careful. People have different parts of themselves.
It's like getting pulled over for secondary screening when your whole group is there. Like, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, no, I didn't.
I will say also that Todd Blanchett's an interesting choice to have him do this. Just because it's your first time doesn't mean you'll be bad at it. But, he is not an experienced defense lawyer. He's an experienced prosecutor. So it's a very different art form. I think so far, with a witness who's got so much baggage, and as you've just heard, there's so many ways to attack him. You're not hearing what you usually get from a defense lawyer, which is clear, telegraphed themes to a jury. And so I was frankly shocked that he started the way he did. I totally agree, Christy, beyond thin-skinned, rude. It was clearly going to get an objection. I am not surprised that you do not want to have your first line of argument be sustained by the judge. Yeah. Jurors tend to like judges and sort of follow their lead. So that was just not great. And there's so many better ways to deal with it. I also feel like, just because a lot of this stuff deals with the special counsel office, and I know personally, there were things that I thought were misleading. And I don't mean that the defense lawyer shouldn't have been asking it, but I was like, oh, come on. They tried to say, didn't Donald Trump sort of, and during the Russia investigation, you were told not to speak to Donald Trump, as if somehow you've been shunned, and that Donald Trump couldn't possibly have told you through indirectly what to say when you testified in front of Congress. That is not how it works. in these kind of cases, everyone is lawyered up. The fact that you're told that means you're inside the tent, not outside the tent.
Right.
And the suggestion that this means that Donald Trump had no way of communicating to him, and we saw
He was tweeting at him the day before and after.
Yes, and you don't think lawyers talk? And again,
Right.
I'm not saying that they're saying a lie, but I mean, they can communicate to what they think is a truthful story as to what should be said. And so I just thought there was some fast and loose with the facts.
Well, and that's a fact problem. I mean, there seems to be, I just want to be really blunt about what's happening right now. There is clearly a performance issue that Judge Merchan has noted with objections that have been sustained. It's been described by reporters in the room in the Times live blog as erratic line of questioning. Yeah. I mean, if he bombs at the performance level, where does that leave you with Trump historically?
Usually you get the boot as the lawyer. I mean, how many lawyers has Donald Trump gone through? I don't mean to...
But Trump doesn't, I mean, Trump didn't care about, where you went to law school. He wants you to look it just feels like this may be a moment.
That's why he lost the decision. The Alina Habba, or he lost the civil fraud trial, yet Alina Habba performed just in his eyes how a lawyer should perform on his behalf. And he was there. And who was there sitting in the second row today? Alina Habba.
Yeah.
Not there arguing in his defense, but sitting there as a witness and a supporter.
I felt like there was some channeling of Donald Trump at the beginning, because one of the first things we get out is he's a liar and a folder. Or a flipper. Donald also doesn't like folders, flippers, liar. But that was one of the first things that came out, was that he's a leaker to the media. And these are all things that Donald Trump is very focused on.
And these are not things that Trump is. I guess my point is, what are you handing me? You read it. What do you got? What do you got? So
I don't read
I
next
guess
to you.
this is happening right now. We should keep an eye on what's happening right now. I am not a lawyer, and I wasn't in the room, but I am a student of Donald Trump. Right. And when someone is viewed to have bombed in some way at a performance level, he doesn't care if you're the smartest lawyer who's ever breathed in air. And so I think this may be a tenuous day. I'm going to peek over at conservative media to see what they say.
Two things. Number one, it's too late to get rid of his lawyers. The person that is doing the cross-examination is the one that is doing the cross-examination at this point. The second part is, being inside of that courthouse here today, usually I've been outside here getting the notes from our team, and Sue and Andrew were like, you've got to go bear witness to this. And I'm glad that I did, because the eyes, we come back to the eyes being shut. For 2 minutes at a time, he'd have his eyes shut this morning. And then he'd open them quickly, mention something to his attorney, but then go back to his eyes shut. And I don't know whether he's sleeping or not. But what was taking me aback was that it was defiance of the process, right?
Yeah, that's
he can't, there's a gag order placed on him. He can't go and stand up and speak out in his own defense in that courtroom unless he takes the stand himself. For him, keeping his eyes shut, almost in a way of disregarding it, I don't care what about these proceedings, with the jury right there, was his act of defiance.
It really does feel that way. We were talking about this in lunch, and I've come down on it. I've seen him do it every day. There's no other, it's not like it's just one day this happened. Right. It is every day for 80 to 90% of the court proceedings. He has his eyes closed. He occasionally will nod off, but that's not what's going on. He has his eyes closed, and I think it is an act of defiance.
80-90% of the time.
He's sending a message, and the jury's picking up on something there, but he doesn't care.
It's so interesting. And what's happening right now is something we'll keep an eye on. I want to ask you about the final sort of chunk of the narrative on Direct that was this morning. I mean, some old characters, Jeff Sessions. I mean, I had a million new questions about when Sessions recuses himself from all. We went back and looked at it. I covered it as and believed it to be Sessions recusing himself from the Russia question. If you go back and watch the video, he says I'm recusing myself from all campaign-related things. Is there what Cohen testifies to today, again under oath, is that Sessions was going to take care of Pecker. That is not Russia-related. That is the cover-up.
Right, and he says that Donald Trump specifically told him that Sessions would have his back.
It's incredible.
That was a direct line. Essentially, Donald Trump saying, we're going to get into the White House. Don't worry about any of this. The Justice Department is going to be on our side. You're taken care of here. And if I may, when we're talking about the closing there of the Direct, Michael Cohen, to Andrew's point about the human side of this, right? all of us have different personalities. At 8 a.m., maybe different than 8 p.m. Saturday Vaughn may be different than Monday Vaughn. Okay?
Tell us more.
TikTok Vaughn may be different than going to the opera Vaughn, okay? And with Michael Cohen, I think that that's the reality. He was talking about being on TikTok, but then what you saw in there was somebody that felt like, to me, he pled guilty to those federal charges just yesterday and was being sentenced. When he was explaining, looking eye to eye with those jurors, of what he pleaded guilty to in being in prison for more than a year, you were hearing a man who was leaving his wife and his child behind. That was the human that in that moment, and I believe a real human, that came out. And that is what the jury, the line that he delivered there, quote, "I regret doing things for him that I should not have. Lying, bullying people in order to effectuate the goal." It sounded like a regretful man. Somebody who at least that moment in time was that human. All the other Michaels could very well be true, but in that moment, that is who the jury heard.
Well, and that's the Michael that was a piece of the crime. I mean, that's the Michael that the jury's going to have to believe on those questions.
I agree, and I think also it's wrong for people to be confusing, is he believable about things he experienced and conversations he's had, meetings he's had, why things were happening, and comparing that to, is he credible about his own internal motivations now about sort of being honest with himself about, can he fully admit I did something wrong in every situation? Those are very different things. And you don't have to believe that he is like completely internalized like who he is now, and that he is like, he knows he should feel sorry, whether he really, really feels sorry or he knows that's where he needs to be. It's a really different attribute about a person. And it's funny because this is where, having dealt with cooperators, and I think defense lawyers deal with this all the time when you have witnesses, and at that point, it's their clients. And those are just very different things, and I think people sort of confuse the two. This is just, like, in terms of his own emotions about how he feels now and whether he's regretful or not, is just not the issue.
Right. Whether he's a fully reformed man is interesting, and it'll be on the minds, I'm sure, of the jurors. They'll wonder that. But in terms of being a credible witness to the criminal scheme that he and Alan Weisselberg put down on paper and walked into Trump's office, that's a different question the jurors are going to have to answer. I want to ask you.
The line to get into the courtroom today started forming last night. People camped out with sleeping bags and pillows. One woman told the New York Times she had paid $750 for someone to hold a space in line for her. Another man reportedly sold his spot in line for $2,000. But as much as seats inside the courtroom today were the hottest ticket in town, the real circus today was outside the courtroom, where first Republican Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and then a gaggle of Trump's vice presidential hopefuls all held press conferences, defending Trump, attacking the trial, and counter-programming what was going on inside that courtroom. Joining us now is Michelle Goldberg, opinion columnist at the New York Times, and Andrew Rice, contributing editor at New York Magazine. Michelle and Andrew, thank you for joining us as we dissect exactly what happened. I just wonder, Michelle, if you have thoughts on what the group text was like as they all coordinated their outfits. Vivek Ramaswamy, Doug Burgum,
and they must have been
Donalds.
disappointed that Trump, I think, had a yellow tie.
I know. He didn't
so they got the wrong message. I mean, the thing that I was actually glad that they were all in the courtroom today. I mean, I wonder if at any point they had a flicker of recognition that this was a trial, this was a day in the trial that was all about what excessive loyalty to Donald Trump gets you. I mean, I just felt like they were, kind of looking at the ghost of Christmas.
A sense of irony? A sense of irony?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if maybe some of them are capable of it, but I just wonder if it ever, there was a point at the very end of his testimony when Michael Cohen talked about his regrets and how he had, out of loyalty to Donald Trump, he had betrayed his own moral compass and at great cost to himself and his family. And I wonder if there was even like a flicker in Mike Johnson's mind about kind of what he was doing at that very moment.
I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that, including Mike Johnson. Andrew, I was struck by the fact, I thought, to Michelle's point, it was very apropos that these individuals showed up today, because in Trump's mind, this is all politics, right? This is auditioning. This is a Veep Stakes audition. This is about how he can milk this for campaign contributions. This is about what it does to his standing as the Republican frontrunner. And in your piece for New York Magazine, you write, before coming into court in the morning, this was yesterday, Trump had waved the Times story accompanying this poll that shows him up ahead in front of reporters in the hallway, saying, "It shows us leading everywhere by a lot. Let the star witness testify," Trump seemed to be saying. He was winning where it mattered. Do you think today did anything to disabuse him of the idea that he's winning?
I doubt it. I mean, you know, I think that the interesting thing that's going on in the courtroom is you see these people, as you say, kind of coming in to almost sort of pay homage to Trump, sitting quietly and listening to this incredibly damning testimony and drawing conclusions that are maybe quite different than what the jury is drawing. But the most interesting thing I thought about Mike Johnson was that it's probably mentioned by others, but you know, he didn't even come into the courtroom. Yeah. He just was in there for a minute, and he came out and decried the witch hunt that was going on inside.
He didn't put his time in on that bench.
He didn't get there. He didn't check his cell phone.
There's also another aspect to this, which is, of course, I mean, I found it both sort of thuggish and pathetic in equal measure, but there's another aspect to this, which is that Donald Trump has a gag order.
Yes.
The gag order prohibits him from making certain statements. He wants to still make those statements. So he is getting other people who are not subject to the gag order to come and make those statements. And it really is the equivalent of, like, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. Like, I mean, it really is that every day, because they come out and they say things that are obviously, I'm not saying like literally copied and pasted from him or given directly, but you know, people know what Donald Trump wants to hear. They parrot the lines of attack, specifically lines of attack that are things that he cannot say.
Well, and specifically lines of attack directed at the judge's daughter,
Correct.
which is a hobby horse of Donald Trump's. We have a little bit of that sound. Let's play it.
The judge inside, his daughter is making millions of dollars running against Donald Trump, raising money for Donald Trump's political opponents.
You've got relatives of the judge that are benefiting financially.
The only thing that's being done wrong is by this judge. His daughter's making money, raising money for Democrats.
The real bookkeeping that we need accounting of is Judge Merchan's own family member collecting millions of dollars as a Democratic operative.
The judge's own daughter is making millions of dollars doing online fundraising for Democrats. They're using this trial as a hook. It's so corrupt. It's so corrupt, and everybody knows it.
Mike, are you wearing the red tie? Yeah, Vivek, I'm wearing the red tie. You got the note about the judge's daughter? I got it, Doug. Byron, you got it? I mean, it is not, they're not even trying to hide what they're doing here.
In court yesterday, actually, I was sitting close enough that I could actually look over Trump's shoulder and see what he was reading. At one point, he was actually reading the quotes that these individuals were, and going through and making notations with a pen on the paper.
Before or after?
While testimony was going on, while Michael Cohen was testifying against him, he was actually going through and annotating and editing the quotes that these people were going to say.
I mean, in addition to being utterly humiliating and transparent, there's also a real question about whether this is legal. Part of the gag order, Michelle, is that you cannot direct others to violate the gag order for you, which is clearly what's happening here.
Right. I mean, it's sort of like he gets hit for retweeting. So instead of retweeting, he just gets the people to come in and
human
actually...
retweets. They're human retweets. That's exactly what they are.
And I mean, and Tommy Tuberville was out there saying, "I am here to help and fight." Right? I'm breaking the gag order. I'm trying to get around the gag order. And I don't even know if there is a body of law that addresses this, because it seems like so outside the norm.
There is, it is, and I'm no legal expert, it is difficult to prove, and it's also like, what leverage does Judge Merchan have over Byron Donalds and, you know, Vivek Ramaswamy? But you would think, in the context of a criminal trial, perhaps, Chris, individuals would be, I don't know, less trepidatious about breaking the law.
Well, I think there's a sort of like testing the limit ethos that has taken over the party. But the other thing about it is, I thought it was so interesting today. They all said the same thing, which is that I'm here as a friend. They clearly have been all told to say I'm here as a friend. And what's interesting about that is that he doesn't have friends, right? Because his friends, Vivek Ramaswamy, Rachel made this point in the brief hour, but put yourself in the position that you find yourself, you are facing criminal trial in New York court. Like, I would hope that my friends and family would be there to support me. I think it would be terrifying. I think it would be a very vulnerable moment, and it would mean a lot to me to have my actual friends and family. He doesn't have that there. Eric and Lara Trump were there today. Those are actual members of his family. But by and large, there has not been family. And I don't think the man has friends in the way that we understand it. And so instead, this weird simulacrum of friendship is being provided by vanquished primary contestants whose voices, boy, did I miss that voice of Vivek Ramaswamy. Wow, so soothing to hear that the microphone again. Like, that's what he has instead.
I mean, but there is the reality, though, that this is a show for two different audiences, right? There's the legal audience, and then there's, to some degree, the right-wing echo chamber. And I do wonder, Michelle, the utility of having this parade of contestants show up and say the same thing about the judge being corrupt and his daughter being corrupt.
Yeah.
Right,
I think and the jury, right? I mean, I think at one point Tommy Tuberville said the jury, if they are Americans.
Yes, just throw in
presumably citizens. Is what he called them.
Just throw in illegal migration just for good measure to stoke the ire of the base. It isn't. I mean, regardless of the fact that it's not based in fact, the repetition over and over and over again has worked for Trump in the past.
Well, right, and I think it's a prophylactic against if he gets a guilty verdict.
Correct.
To kind of invalidate it in the minds of his followers and maybe the kind of people who told pollsters that it would matter to them if a presidential candidate was convicted of a felony. And so it's a way to sort of neutralize that and maybe even turn it into an advantage among people who either like Donald Trump's gangster persona or see him as a kind of martyr for their particular grievances.
And in the meantime, the guys that auditioned today, Andrew, did any of them strike you as particularly more effective than others?
I mean, from within the courtroom, none of them struck me as anything because they're really just potted plants sitting there and listening to the
playing on their
testimony.
phone,
Occasionally playing on their phone.
Which we can't do.
Vance was live tweeting while it was going on, but really, it's a kind of ultimate show of loyalty to sit through this at times quite stultifyingly boring testimony about checks and so on, and to spend your entire day doing that and then go out and deliver a speech. These are all, with the exception of Ramaswamy, these are all elected office holders who presumably have other things that they could be doing to serve the American people.
Ramaswamy is a little unclear, but the other ones do have jobs, as last I checked.
Speaker of the House maybe has some things to do, maybe. Michelle Goldberg and Andrew Rice, thank you so much for your time and thoughts tonight, guys. Really appreciate it.
There is no doubt that Michael Cohen has been a strong witness against defendant Trump, driving headlines about his testimony that has basically marked the official finale of this case. He is the last witness, and you can see the check stubs, the fake receipts, the loyalty, the inside knowledge that is now hurting defendant Trump. But today, the defense lawyers got their turn. They began an effort to blunt Cohen's testimony, to undercut his credibility. Attorney Todd Blanche came out swinging. His first question quoted Cohen calling Blanche himself an expletive. The question was overruled, but it set the combative tone, and so far Cohen kept his composure. We just discussed that earlier in the hour. He's reportedly been preparing for months. But if prosecutors fail to convict Trump, it will likely turn on this cross-examination of Cohen today and Thursday, because he's not a perfect witness. And this is the defense's chance to not just talk about reasonable doubt, but to really raise the doubts in the jury's mind about this star witness and co-conspirator. Today, the defense questions suggested many different doubts. Is Cohen's story the whole truth? Did he have an unhealthy and even unhinged psychodramatic relationship with Donald Trump, whom he once said he was obsessed with? At one point, the lawyer asked, and Cohen largely acknowledged himself as a kind of cult follower. Here's another question the lawyers are getting at. Is Michael Cohen so bitter, even understandably bitter, that his claims have become unreliable? Can he be trusted, the lawyers asked this afternoon, if Cohen admits publicly that his goal is to see Trump convicted in this case? And when he was asked about that, this was just within the last few hours, this is brand new, he said, sure, yeah, that's what I want to see happen. I want the conviction. Here's another question. Does Cohen still lie to investigators because he's done that before? And since he's making money off the Trump relationship and this very trial, can his testimony be trusted? And then one of the more damaging lines of questioning today, why should the jury trust Michael Cohen's fidelity to this trial and its rules and a fair process if he wouldn't even honor basic requests from prosecutors to stop doing the TV and the TikToks and the social media where he would attack Trump even up through and during this very trial? Now, as journalists, we welcome all these people. We interview them. You may have noticed we do that. But legally, I have to tell you, that is a fair question. And the judge has even rebuked Cohen through his lawyers for all of the public statements. Now, none of these questions is some kind of deal breaker, but together, the defense lawyers are trying to cut and diminish and eventually liquidate the credibility that Cohen has and the story that he's told to the friendlier audience, the prosecutors over yesterday and this morning, and their more, linear questions about how he went from loyalist to this star witness. Now remember, the jury's not made of highly informed news and politics junkies. They're mostly hearing details about Cohen's evolution that are new to them. And the defense harped on Cohen's shift as if it were fundamentally suspicious. They suggested through the questioning today, and we'll see what they do Thursday, that he is a person who will maybe say anything to anybody, depending on his own personal interest that day, and that the government can't possibly hang a case beyond a reasonable doubt on a witness like this to prove a defendant's intent about schemes that Cohen helped pull off.
I know Mr. Trump. I've stood by him shoulder to shoulder for the past decade. Donald cares for no one or anything other than himself.
I'm obviously very loyal and very dedicated to Mr. Trump.
I am going to jail. I think he's going to be a great president because of my decision to help Mr. Trump hide that payment.
That's a back and forth that we've all followed, but for this jury, a lot of the details are pretty new. It might jog a memory here or there, but a lot of it's like, whoa. And so they're hearing two competing versions of the same story. And one is, of course, this guy shifted. Who wouldn't? Look what he went through and then went to prison. And now he has every reason to tell the truth. But this other story is, this guy might have gone to prison for his own reasons, might have been the type of person who ended up in prison anyway. And look how he's acting, not then and not after the break and not leading up to the trial. Look how he's acting in the last few weeks. Now, some of this evidence, I want to be clear legally, is not as important as the secret tapes or the actual financial receipts that defendant Trump is facing. But it was notable. And inside the courtroom today, I definitely saw jurors who were watching closely, as many of them saw, possibly for the first time, how Cohen's podcast arm, he has this thing, the Mea Culpa podcast, sells this T-shirt you see on the screen. And I want to be clear. This shirt was shown today, was admitted into evidence to the jury, that this is a person who didn't just have an experience with Trump or has some anger with Trump, but is looking at what many people still see as the presumed innocent former president of the United States, just stuck behind bars there in imagined incarceration, all yours for the, the good price of $27.99.
Good morning, Legal AFers. Good morning, Karen Friedman Agnifilo. Good morning to all the mighty out there. We're in week 5, day 18 of the Donald Trump criminal trial in Manhattan for falsification of business records. This will be the last day this week of trial. Donald Trump requested Friday off previously, saying that he would be attending Barron's graduation. Whether or not that actually happens is to be determined, but the judge never denied Donald Trump the ability to go to Barron's graduation, simply said, I wasn't making a ruling during the first day of jury selection, but as the trial has progressed at an expeditious pace, Justice Merchan said, look, we can take that Friday off. By all accounts, the district attorney's office has informed Justice Merchan, has informed the court, has informed the defendants and the defense lawyer that Michael Cohen is going to be their last witness in the prosecution's case in chief. They believe that ending with Michael Cohen, based on how he's done thus far, would be ending on a strong and powerful note. So no more witnesses from the prosecution. The question then becomes, will the defense put on a defense or will they rest? Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's lawyer, had, I think, previously informed the court that there may be a expert witness who the defense may be considering putting on, but said that it's possible that that expert is not going to testify. So it doesn't seem like there's going to be any other witnesses. I don't know, Karen, if today, after Cohen completes, if they do complete Cohen's cross-exam, after Cohen finishes, if Justice Merchan's going to then ask at that moment, or will ask early in the day, do you intend, does your client intend to take the stand, so we can prepare for that if that's going to come in the morning? I'll get your take in the afternoon at all tomorrow, or if they're going to wait for Monday to address that question. But if Cohen's cross-exam finishes tomorrow, and there's some indication that the cross-exam may finish tomorrow, I think that's how Blanche at least thought at the end of the proceedings on Tuesday. Although I think Blanche has gotten so much criticism for not doing a good job on the cross-exam thus far, he may have to retool and kind of come up with some other strategy. So we'll see if he's going to try to rebound after what many people are saying was just so far a really poor cross-examination of Michael Cohen thus far, and also Michael Cohen doing a good job, as good of a job as he can under these types of circumstances in cross-exam. Karen, we also expect there to be a new group in Donald Trump's entourage. Every day he's been bringing new MAGA Republican members from Congress. The expectation today is that Matt Gaetz, Anna Paulina Luna, and Andy Biggs, all who have had kind of personal issues as well, they will be joining and accompanying Donald Trump to the courthouse. I think the striking image of Melania not being there and MAGA Republican members of Congress being there, and the only family member of Trump to be there is Eric. It just seems like a disastrous strategy to highlight that Donald Trump directly undercutting the defense, to the extent there is one, that Donald Trump was worried about Melania when no family other than Eric for a little bit was there to be seen. But Trump keeps parading in these politicians. And I have to imagine that the jury sees what's going on and they're kind of wise to that piece of it. And I'll toss it to you, Karen, but between Trump continuing to fall asleep with Trump's lawyers, I mean, Susan Neckles having that really bad cross of Stormy Daniels, and she was supposed to have a good reputation, but by all accounts, her cross was a disaster. Then you have Todd Blanche, who was supposed to have a good reputation. So far, his cross is a disaster. Michael Cohen and all the prosecution's witness presenting professionally. Trump trying to turning the court with Matt Gaetz and people like that into a circus. I just have to imagine, and again, I can't read the jurors' minds, but his behavior is so abhorrent that when you're in this fish tank, fishes aren't in boxes. When you're in this fish tank that is a jury trial, the jury's looking at who they relate to, who they cheering for, and Trump's behavior is just so abhorrent. It's just shockingly disrespectful and disgusting. So that's my 2 cents. But today's the day, right? I mean, this is the big moment right here. Is Michael Cohen going to hold up on cross-exam the way he did before? Is Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, going to rebound? This is kind of the most important day of the trial, right? This is for all the marbles, as we used to say growing up. You can still say that. We used to say growing up. Karen, what do you think's going on?
Well, what a way to tell the jury this is not about the election, but tell them it's about the election, as you said, by parading all these politicians in and making this political. I mean, juries, it's so interesting to me about juries because they see and hear everything that's going on in terms of the evidence and the witnesses, but they also see everything else. They see who's there, who's not there, who's coming in, etc. They see that Donald Trump is falling asleep. They see, all the things that are going on. They see it. And so, yes, they will see that this is a political kind of people showing up to pay the respects of the mob boss and kiss the ring and leave. There's no one person sitting there like that cares about him, who's been there every single day, who's just like, this is a good guy, I love him, like his kids, anybody. It's just what other person can come in and literally kiss the ring of the mob boss. That's what it's going to look like, and they know what's happening because they see that people are not able to get into the courtroom at certain times or leave at certain times, and they have prime seats and they're acting differently than everybody else. So it's very much what he's doing. He's sending this other message to them, which I'm not sure is a great message to the jury. What is he trying to do? Intimidate the witnesses? Intimidate Michael Cohen by having these people there? I mean, because I don't really understand how it helps him in any way. Look, I think he miscalculated the fact that they just assume that a conviction is a given here because it's a Manhattan jury. And so they're only playing this in the court of public opinion, not in the court of law. And that's a mistake because there is a decent defense here, but they're just not availing themselves of it. And instead, they're literally... It's backfiring. Look, it's no sure thing. It's still, he's still innocent until proven guilty. He's not guilty of these crimes until the 12 jurors agree that he is. So, there's still a long way to go, even though today might be the last day of testimony on the People's Direct case, although we don't know. The cross-examination, I suspect, is going to last all day, but it could last longer. It could go into next week. And next week's a short week again as well, because they're giving Friday before Memorial Day off. I think a juror had an issue. And so it's only a 3-day week again, because Wednesdays the court is always off. So this is kind of, I agree with you, the most important day of the trial, because the rest of the case has gone in beautifully. They've absolutely proven beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime was committed and that a felony was committed, in my opinion. But Michael Cohen is the key, I think, because Alan Weisselberg isn't coming in. I think he's the key to really linking it to Donald Trump beyond a reasonable doubt. There's circumstantial evidence that Trump is guilty of this crime, but Michael Cohen is critical. And almost everything he says has been corroborated, which is great. And the prosecution did a great job at introducing all of the evidence that corroborates Michael Cohen before he testified. And it's a way of letting the jury see that evidence twice. They saw it when it was introduced, and then they're going to see it again through Michael Cohen. And so that reinforces the importance of this corroborative evidence, things like phone records, calendar entries, whatever it is, defendant's own tweets, his own words, book, things that he says in books about how he does things. And then here you have Michael Cohen saying something happened like that, et cetera. Just all the evidence that corroborates it, the criminal scheme written down on Exhibit 35 and 36, where you don't get evidence like that in trials, where usually it's much more subtle. You don't get evidence where you've got the CFO, Alan Weisselberg, on the actual bank statement that Michael Cohen opened, right? This account to pay Stormy Daniels. He deposited $131,000 in it, and then he took out $130,000. I mean, and then you have Alan Weisselberg in his handwriting saying okay, 130, gross up, with like he literally spells out the crime on this bank statement. Like it doesn't get better than that piece of evidence, and so it's going really, really well. But and as you said, the first half day of Michael Cohen's cross-examination, I was not in the courtroom, but by all accounts, it kind of fell flat, and partly I think because Michael, I am told, and I'm reading what he said, did really well. He answered the questions. He owned his mistakes. He owned who he is. He owned up to all of the things he has done. And Todd Blanche, I think, I don't know, maybe Michael Cohen got under his skin because Todd Blanche went after him and made it personal. Oh, did you call me names? And I forgot what name it was, dipshit or something like that, and like made it about himself. And that's just not good lawyering to make it personal. It's not supposed to be personal. And I think it clouded his judgment because he's, by all accounts, a really good lawyer, I've heard, by reputation. So I think it must have clouded his judgment. And the rest of his cross-examination so far, I don't think had the impact that he wanted it to have. I think part of it too is the prosecution took the sting out of all his zingers. Everything he had, it's not like any good lawyer, especially a good prosecutor, especially Susan Hoffinger, who was a trained defense attorney for the last 2 decades. She was a prosecutor early on in her career, but she's one of the criminal defense attorneys, white-collar criminal defense attorneys in New York. And Alvin Bragg brought her in to be an executive, and she's trying this case, right? So she knows she knows exactly what the cross-examination of Michael Cohen would be. She knows where the pressure points are, where what the tricks are going to be. And so rather than letting the defense attorney do them, she gets them all out ahead of time, just deflates the balloon, takes all of the air and steam out of his arguments. And so the jury's already heard it. And guess where they heard it? They heard it in voir dire. They heard it in the opening, and then they heard it on the direct of Michael Cohen. So by the time they heard all that from the prosecution. So by the time Todd Blanche is getting to it in his cross-examination, the jury's like, yeah, we heard that already. Can you get to your point? And can you get to, like, is your client guilty or not? We realize that Michael Cohen himself has done things in his life too, but we're here about your client, not just about Michael Cohen. And, the fact of the matter is he's got to be careful, Ben, because the more he dirties up Michael Cohen, frankly, and the more he makes him look bad, the worse it makes Donald Trump look, because Donald Trump is the one who embraced him when he was at that point in his life doing these bad things. He has since redeemed himself. He has since made it a point to absolutely change his ways and try to redeem himself and try to get forgiveness. And what happens when he turned a new leaf? Donald Trump abandoned him and said he's a bad person. But back when he was willing to do nefarious things, commit crimes on his behalf, lie on his behalf, bully people on his behalf, Donald Trump embraced him. And the prosecution's already put in those social media posts where he talked about what a good man Michael Cohen was when he was bad, and what a bad man he is when he was good. All of that is going to be told to the jury. So go ahead, make him look really bad back in the days when you were embracing him as your personal attorney, because that's what you liked. That's what you embraced. And that is what's going to backfire if he goes hard on Cohen like that. So I just think they are doing a really, really elementary kind of non-subtle cross that is not been effective so far. And Michael Cohen is well prepped, clearly. The DA's office knew how to prep him and got him to where he needs to be. Now, today's a big day. And so hopefully Michael holds up. The prosecution has not been able to speak to him since he got off cross on Tuesday, because the rule is, or the law is, basically you're not allowed to talk to the witness when they're on cross-examination. You're not allowed to go back and kind of help them and prep them. You just can't. So he's had to deal with it himself. Over the last, Wednesday, yesterday was a day off, and back on cross today. And so, I'm sure Todd Blanche also got feedback, and so hopefully he's from his perspective, I'm sure he's going to retool his cross and take a different tack, because what he was doing is not effective. Either that, or he's going to do again what Donald Trump asked him to do, which is, try this in the court of public opinion rather than in a court of law, because what he's doing is not effective, and at least in my opinion. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But today's a very, very big day. And then, as you said, after that, there might be a defense case. There might not. If there is a defense case, the prosecution may or may not put on a rebuttal case. And then come summations. And then summations go, the defense goes first, and then the prosecution goes after that. And then the jury is charged, and then it's in the jury's hands. And that is the long, waiting for a verdict is one of the hardest things in the whole world. You can, we'll talk about that when we get to that point, but that's an intense, a very intense experience.
One of the things I love about our analysis, and I love about your analysis, though, is kind of preparing our viewers and the audience for things that are going to happen. Whereas it becomes this major breaking story when Donald Trump says he's not going to testify. And then the media's like, whoa. And they're like, how it becomes such a big story. It's like, we've been preparing people for that moment that may come today. May not, but where Justice Merchan's going to ask, are you putting on Donald Trump? And Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche or Emil Bove or Susan Neckles is going to say, no, he's not going to be taking the stand. And that's going to be a major story that may be in a few hours, and it may be, next week. I think also following the developments in the different cases is interesting too. Like, remember, Joe Tacopina, remember that? Tacky Tacopina is what they were calling him. He actually did, all things considered, when you think about the work he did in the first E. Jean Carroll trial, keeping that verdict at around $5 million. In retrospect, seems like he achieved a significant result given all of the facts against Donald Trump, and the fact that in the next defamation case against Donald Trump with post-judgment interest, it was like $90 million when Alina Habba was representing Trump. The reason I mentioned Joe Tacopina is Tacopina was the lawyer on this case. Remember, Tacopina was there after Donald Trump was indicted back 2 Marches ago, and then he quit. He left the team and he went on MSNBC, told Al Sharpton that he had to look at his own moral compass, or words to that effect, and said, I'm not doing this anymore. And so you think about Tacopina not being a part of this team. You think about the rise of kind of Todd Blanche on the team. And Todd Blanche, again, by all accounts, was a kind of white-collar defense lawyer and had a good reputation. But seeing how Donald Trump threw Tacopina under the bus, and just how Trump's behavior is so all-encompassing, right? Like, Trump's behavior takes over the Republican Party. The Republican Party can't have an independent identity. It's the Trump Party. It's MAGA. Trump's lawyers, whether it's Susan Neckles, Todd Blanche, they become Trumpers. Like, good lawyers become Trumpers, and they're no longer good lawyers anymore. And you're watching this and you're like, this is strange. This is some really bad lawyering from people who are supposed to be good lawyers. Like, what in the world is happening there? And you just see these kind of mini trials within the trial develop, from Stormy Daniels' compelling testimony to Michael Cohen's compelling testimony to Trump falling asleep to Trump bringing all of these Republicans to sit there and campaign in the court and to intimidate witnesses in front of the jury. Just the way this has developed, the twists and turns of this thing are just, are so odd, so strange, so many unforced errors by Donald Trump here and Trump's legal team. And I think it just raises a broader issue too of just his, I won't be political on this show, just overall judgment and character. It really shows in the pressure cooker of, as I called it, the fish box, which I meant the fish tank of the criminal trial. It's all on display. And so we head into this really big day, day 18, week 5. This is it. This is it right here, right now, in just a few moments. Karen, anything else you want to say?
I kind of like the term fish box, actually. Look, but, Ben, by the time we have a verdict in this case, you will be a married man. So it's a big, momentous occasion that is happening in the middle of this big, momentous trial. So I'm really excited for you, and I'm really excited to be doing this with you.
Well, we couldn't be prouder to have you on the Midas Touch team and to have you leading our coverage on the Trump criminal trial and leading all coverage in the United States and in the world on this Trump criminal trial. Thank you, Karen Friedman and Niflo. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will be back soon. Keep checking in on the network for breaking news updates throughout the day. As always, make sure you hit subscribe. It's free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to audio on Legal AF as well. Thanks for watching.
Enough! Send it to the big house, not the White House. Get the new exclusive tees, mugs, and stickers right now at store.midastouch.com. That's store.midastouch.com.
Well, Donald Trump's...
Now it is time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Alex. And Joe Biden is facing a challenge in the upcoming debates that no presidential debater in history has ever faced. Nothing even close to it. And it's one that could create a gigantic challenge for Joe Biden. He may not be able to say anything about Donald Trump's indictments during these debates. And that's a prospect no one's considered yet. Andrew Weissman's going to consider it for us in this discussion coming up.
Let's just talk about Wednesdays. It's a code word. Maybe.
Right.
Who could know? Ask Weissman if that's legal. I'm going to be watching.
All right, we'll check that one. Right. Thanks, Alex.
Right. Have a good show.
Thank you. Red necktie friends, who Alex was just talking about, came to the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse this week to praise one of the criminal defendants in the building and to attack District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who Donald Trump falsely accuses of spending all of his time and resources on the prosecution of Donald Trump.
For People versus Harvey Weinstein, we are moving forward in that matter. We intend to retry it, and for those of you in the court saw that the court set sort of a window for a trial in the fall. And so we are already moving forward with that matter, having conversations with survivors, centering their well-being, and pursuing justice. We are here now because the work of the office goes on in so many ways. As those of you who cover the office know, the breadth of our work, and that work continues. We have the expertise and resources to take on tough cases while driving down crime alongside our law enforcement partners. That includes, over the past 2 years, driving shootings down 48% in Manhattan, murders down 17%, burglary down 31%, and overall index crimes down 7%, outpacing the citywide decline of 0.6%.
And that is but a tiny sample of the work that District Attorney Alvin Bragg is doing every day with his team of more than 500 prosecutors handling more than 35,000 active cases every year. If those Republican candidates for vice president really support law enforcement, they would have come to New York to congratulate Alvin Bragg. Just when you thought a presidential debate that includes Donald Trump couldn't become more ridiculous, it has. President Joe Biden will be debating Donald Trump with one hand tied behind his back, legally. Donald Trump will, in the debate studio, will be claiming that every criminal prosecution Donald Trump faces is being run by Joe Biden. Donald Trump says that every day. Everyone has heard that before, and we will hear it again on the debate stage, and the moderators will do nothing to contradict that because, in their traditional view, that will be Joe Biden's job. Debate moderators will use the standard playbook of allowing the other candidate to answer accusations made by the opposing candidate. But what will Joe Biden be able to say about the prosecutions of Donald Trump? Maybe nothing. Because presidents not named Trump never comment on pending criminal cases. Prior to Donald Trump, the most famous and possibly only instance we had of this was when President Richard Nixon said in 1970 that Charles Manson was guilty of mass murder in the Hollywood Hills of actors Sharon Tate and 7 other people.
I noted, for example, the coverage of the Charles Manson
case when I was in Los Angeles. Front page every day in the papers. It usually got a couple of minutes in the evening news. Here is a man who was guilty, directly or indirectly, of 8 murders without reason.
The problem was Charles Manson wasn't guilty yet. President Nixon said that in the middle of the Manson family trial. The Manson criminal defense lawyers immediately asked for a mistrial because of the president's undue influence in the jury. Nixon made the statement just before boarding Air Force One in Denver to fly back to Washington, and as soon as the plane landed at Andrews Air Force Base, White House staff issued this written statement by the President of the United States. To set the record straight, I do not know and did not intend to speculate as to whether the taped defendants are guilty in fact or not. All of the facts in the case have not yet been presented. The defendants should be presumed to be innocent at this stage of their trial. The next day, at the defense table, defendant Manson held up for the jury a Los Angeles Times headline saying, "Manson guilty, Nixon declares." The New York Times reported, Superior Court Judge Charles Older took immediate steps to forestall a mistrial by questioning the jurors individually about whether the incident had prejudiced them. All but one of the 12 regular jurors and 6 alternates testified that they had witnessed Manson's action, but they all said they could act impartially. One man said he hoped he could. Just before the session ended, Judge Older also sentenced a defense lawyer, Day Shin, to county jail for 3 nights on contempt charges for putting newspapers on the counsel table where Manson could get at them. And the judge asked each juror to swear under oath that they would be able to reach a verdict based solely on the evidence presented in the courtroom. Joe Biden remembers the 2 days in 1970 when the President of the United States almost derailed Charles Manson's murder trial. Everyone in high school or older in the United States at that time remembers it. Joe Biden is a more careful person and a more careful lawyer than Richard Nixon. Joe Biden has not said anything about the overwhelming evidence against Donald Trump in the criminal charges that he faces for violations of the Espionage Act and illegal possession of classified material. Joe Biden has said nothing about the overwhelming evidence in the indictment of Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. for a conspiracy against the United States of America, a conspiracy to defraud the United States of America by illegally changing the results of the presidential election. Joe Biden has said nothing about the criminal charges Donald Trump is facing in Georgia, where Donald Trump was recorded on the phone demanding that the Georgia Secretary of State change the vote count in the presidential election. Any other candidate running for president against Donald Trump could attack Donald Trump in a presidential debate on every one of those cases, as long as that candidate running against Donald Trump were not the president of the United States. News coverage of Donald Trump has worn out the word unprecedented. But here we are tonight, at the end of a full day of news coverage of what will be the Biden-Trump debates, and the news media still hasn't even realized how unprecedented those debates will be this time because of the criminal indictments facing Donald Trump. There will be a nominee in the debate facing at least 3 indictments who will already have been convicted or found not guilty in an earlier trial happening now in New York City. If there is a hung jury in the Manhattan trial and the district attorney announces that he is going to pursue a retrial of Donald Trump on those same charges, then Joe Biden won't be able to talk about that case either. A so-called debate that was already going to be ridiculous is going to be even more preposterous. It will be the theater of the absurd. Joe Biden won't just have one hand tied behind his back. He will be put in a legal straitjacket. And the unfair benefit to Donald Trump is enormous. Joe Biden is a good lawyer who could rip up Donald Trump in a debate just talking about the criminal indictments against Donald Trump alone. Instead, we will see the latest version of the standard TV debate format, which is already problematic to the point of absurdity. I've seen every televised debate in presidential history. That's how few of them there have been. Most presidents were elected without debating anyone. That's how unnecessary presidential debates are. I was a little kid sitting on the floor of the living room in Boston watching the very first televised presidential debate between Vice President Richard Nixon and that Boston boy, Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy. I was in college the next time they had a presidential debate, 16 years later, in 1976, between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. Televised debates are not a mandatory part of presidential campaigning. They are a show created by and for television. They did not exist before television. No one thought they were necessary. The historically famous Lincoln-Douglas debates were not presidential debates. They were debates for an Illinois Senate campaign, which Abraham Lincoln lost. The television version of debate doesn't actually test presidential skills. In the rooms where presidents govern, they are never told. They only have 2 minutes to respond to what someone just said in that room. Presidents never have to make decisions alone. Presidents always have expert advice available to them, as much advice as they want or need. No one has ever run into the Oval Office and said, Mr. President, you have 30 seconds to respond. Never. And they never will. Nothing presidential is actually being tested in the phony debates that the television industry pretends are invaluable, because they're really good for the television industry. Candidates standing there alone on a debate stage answering questions about how they will govern is an entirely fictional television construct of how presidents actually do their work. You don't need to remember everything about the tax code or the throw weight of missiles, the Social Security trust funds all the time when you're president. If a president struggles to remember a name or a number in the Oval Office, no one snaps at him, no one panics, no one thinks the president is losing it. Every professional working with a president, a serious president, knows that every president not named Trump has the largest range of governing information and responsibility in his head of anyone in that room. Everything from agriculture policy to the latest terrorist threat. If the FAA director comes into the Oval Office to talk about the stress of overburdened air traffic controllers, the FAA director expects to know and should know a lot more than the president knows about that particular subject. That's why he's there, to help the president. But if, say, when the FAA director is walking into the Oval Office, he sees the CIA director leaving, the FAA director should assume that she's talking to a president who might be distracted by something much more serious and darker that he just heard from the CIA director than what the FAA director is now there to discuss. But the televised presidential debate turns on the childish notion that the president is supposed to know everything all the time about everything. And he is supposed to state the most important points about everything in 2 minutes to an audience that has a tiny fraction of understanding of what a knowledgeable, serious president knows. What you want is a president who can think. And they almost never have to think quickly. So you want a president who can deliberate and think carefully. And they absolutely never have to think alone. What you want is a president who has demonstrated the ability to find the best choice in the agonizing presidential situations of having no good choice. None of the presidential debate moderators, all of whom are very good at their work, have ever seen a presidential decision made. They have never been in the room where that happens when it happens. They have never seen a presidential decision on its way to being made. They have no idea how many weeks or years of thinking by the president and the people around him shaped that presidential decision that is announced to them in a White House press briefing. That is in no way a criticism of the moderators announced today for the CNN debate and the ABC debate, each of whom will definitely do a better job than I could ever do in that situation. But there is nothing the moderators can do to fix the conceptual flaw in the very notion of televised presidential debates. The flaw that was there at the birth in 1960, when the television business decided to pretend that the presidential debate could actually be a window into how the potential president would actually do his work. Joe Biden started it all this morning with this.
Donald Trump lost 2 debates to me in 2020. Since then, he hadn't shown up for debate. Now he's acting like he wants to debate me again. Well, make my day, pal. I'll even do it twice. So let's pick the dates, Donald. I hear you're free on Wednesday.
That was at 8 a.m. And then 2 hours and 14 minutes later, at 10:14 a.m., Joe Biden announced, "I've received and accepted an invitation from CNN for a debate on June 27th. Over to you, Donald. As you said, anywhere, anytime, any place." Half an hour later, Donald Trump accepted the June 27th CNN debate invitation. And then an hour later, Donald Trump posted on social media his accepting a September 10th invitation for an ABC television debate. 2 minutes later, Joe Biden officially accepted the September 10th ABC debate invitation in a tweet. The Biden campaign laid down a set of conditions for debates this morning. The debates should be one-on-one, allowing voters to compare the only 2 candidates with any statistical chance of prevailing in the Electoral College and not squandering debate time on candidates with no prospect of becoming president. The moderators should be selected by the broadcast host from among their regular personnel so as to avoid a ringer or partisan. There should be firm time limits for answers and alternate turns to speak, so that the time is evenly divided and we have an exchange of views, not a spectacle of mutual interruption. A candidate's microphone should only be active when it is his turn to speak to promote adherence to the rules and orderly proceedings. Good luck with that. Leading off our discussion tonight is Andrew Weissman, former FBI General Counsel and former Chief of the Criminal Division in the Eastern District of New York. He's an MSNBC legal analyst and co-author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Trump Indictments. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And as soon as I heard about the debates this morning, I began to wonder. I thought of Richard Nixon talking about Charles Manson, who you couldn't say is...
MAGA sycophants Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz are currently sitting inside the Manhattan courtroom where Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, is going through a 3rd day of cross-examination by Trump's lawyers. I want to update you guys on everything going on inside the courtroom. As always, make sure to leave a like on the video. But for a quick recap, Cohen grew combative Tuesday under cross-examination from the defense, which has tried to depict him as untruthful and biased against Trump. There will be no trial tomorrow so that the former president can attend his son Barron Trump's high school graduation. Trump faces 34 counts of course, falsifying business records to hide the reimbursement to Cohen for the payment he made to adult film actor Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet and ultimately influence the results of the 2020 election. And today we saw easily the most dreadful collection of MAGA faces. I didn't know if it could get much worse than people like Vivek Ramaswamy, people like Mike Johnson or J.D. Vance showing up, but today, in one go, we saw Matt Gaetz show up, Lauren Boebert show up, we saw Luna, Good, Crane, Biggs, just a group of MAGA degenerates all in court to support Trump. And I want to point out really quickly something I got from Midas Touch. Donald Trump is trying to make the argument that he made these hush money payments to protect his family, not to further his political career, but we haven't seen any of his family show up at the court other than Eric Trump, but we have seen many politicians coming through, which weakens Donald Trump and his lawyers' argument argument that he doesn't care about politics, he only cares about his family. If he cared about his family so much, where is Melania? Where is Ivanka? Why have none of the women in his life showed up other than people like Lauren Boebert? And Twitter/X was having a field day with Lauren Boebert's appearance. Ron Filipkowski said, Boebert doesn't show up for his son's criminal court dates where he says he can't afford a lawyer. Instead, the MAGA Mother of the Year is up in NYC giving a hand to Donald Trump. I see what you did there, Ron. George Conway said, Lauren Boebert just walked into the courtroom. Please pray we do not have a power failure. Obviously in reference to the last time Lauren Boebert was in a dark room. But to move on to what's going on inside the courtroom, Trump dons usual uniform in court today. As he settles in for another day of the trial, Trump is wearing a navy suit and red tie, the same outfit his surrogates seemed to copy earlier this week. I find it really weird that Trump surrogates showed up wearing the same exact uniform that Trump wears every day. Today, none of the surrogates seated behind him are wearing the uniform, despite there being a notable group of his allies present in court. And only minutes after Trump entered the courtroom with his allies, Trump was seen leaning back with his eyes closed, as he's been for much of Michael Cohen's testimony. Again, this reminds me of when I used to have detentions back in high school for being late too many times, and when you're in there, you get this urge to be more of a nuisance. You want to sit there with your eyes closed, you want to use your phone in secret. I think that is what Donald Trump is doing. He has this juvenile urge to disrupt, to show that he's too cool for this. So he sits there with his eyes closed while Michael Cohen nukes the defense's argument entirely. But Boebert and Gates, two of Trump's congressional allies in the courtroom today, keep turning around to stare at anti-Trump attorney George Conway. And this part is truly disturbing. Matt Gaetz then shared a photo of himself standing outside the courtroom earlier on X, saying he was standing back and standing by, which is clearly a reference to when Trump told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by during one of Trump's presidential debates against Biden in 2020. The comment by Trump was widely criticized as being seen as encouraging the group, which ultimately participated in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. I don't even get what Matt Gaetz means with that vague threat. What is he standing by for? Is he going to bum rush the judge when things aren't going Donald Trump's way? But the defense then played a clip from Michael Cohen's anti-Trump podcast, Mea Culpa with Midas Touch. The defense is playing a clip from an episode of Cohen's Mea Culpa podcast, during which a very excitable, bombastic Cohen said that the prospect of Trump going through the booking process filled him with both delight and sadness, because it meant his former boss would get a taste of what the ex-fixer has experienced, but that it was tragic for the office of the presidency. Trump is sitting through loud clips of Cohen's podcast in which his former employee is talking about wanting to see the former president go to prison and otherwise suffer criminal penalties. Another case of Midas Touch entering the history books, but Trump lawyer Todd Blanche brought up a Truth Social post Trump shared in mid-March in which he called Cohen a jailbird. Blanche asked Cohen if he responded on X to Trump and if he called him dumb fuck Donald. Sounds correct, Cohen said. Trump attorney gets Michael Cohen to concede he previously lied under oath. Blanche is hammering Cohen on instances in which he lied under oath in years past, including false statements he made to the House Select Committee on Intelligence and the special counsel's office during Robert Mueller's probe into Trump's links to Russia. So obviously they're trying to plant a seed of doubt in the jury's heads that Michael Cohen is a credible witness, and if they can plant that seed of doubt in just a single juror's head, then they will have a hung jury. They need a unanimous agreement in order to convict Donald Trump. So by delegitimizing Michael Cohen and his allegations, by making it seem like he has a proclivity to lying under oath, they get closer to being able to debase everything he said. Even though he's provided a lot of receipts and a lot of concrete evidence, all they need to do is plant that seed of doubt in one juror's mind, and that's the goal for them. And as Trump lawyer Todd Blanche presses Cohen on scenarios in which he lied or omitted information to authorities under oath, the jury has watched Cohen carefully this morning but hasn't been taking notes for the most part, which is kind of a departure from the previous days where they were very intently watching Michael Cohen and taking notes on everything he says. And an NBC analyst builds on what I said earlier. Trump lawyer Todd Blanche is using perhaps the best example of Cohen constantly shifting his story on a single constellation of facts. He said one thing when he pleaded guilty to tax evasion under oath in 2018. He said another in his public statements about the plea and in his testimony in the civil fraud trial last fall, and then tried out a third middle ground starting Tuesday in this trial. The underlying facts don't matter at all. They are totally unrelated to Trump. In fact, they reinforce that Cohen has a criminal history separate and apart from his misdeeds for and in coordination with Trump, and could leave the impression that Cohen is a shifty, self-interested, and self-righteous liar. Those are the words of NBC. Then Trump's attorney Todd Blanche just had an exchange with Michael Cohen that sums up his general tack over the last half hour or so, highlighting ways Cohen has shifted the blame for his convictions away from himself and onto others. You blame a lot of people over the years for the conduct that you were convicted of, Blanche says. I blame people, yes, Cohen says. You blame your accountant, Blanche says. Correct, Cohen responds. At times you blame the bank, correct, Cohen says. You blame federal prosecutors, Blanche asks. Yes, sir, Cohen says. The questions continue with that cadence, with Blanche adding judges and Donald Trump, to which Cohen also responds that yes, he has blamed them at times for his wrongdoing. But he then accepted responsibility when asked about lying under oath. But do you agree with me that lying under oath is not accepting responsibility, asks Blanche. Cohen asked him to clarify the question. Do you agree with me that when you plead guilty to a crime and you're lying, that's not accepting responsibility for your conduct, Blanche asks. I accepted responsibility and I was suffering the consequences as a result. Does the outcome of this trial affect you personally, Trump attorney Todd Blanche asked, echoing a similar line of questioning from his cross-examination on Tuesday. Yes, Michael Cohen said. Cohen's tone is still measured as he answers, but he looks annoyed in court. Cohen then looked at the jury with a smile and shakes his head as attorneys sidebar with Judge Merchan. Michael Cohen looked over at the jury with a small smile and shook his head as attorneys sidebar with Judge Juan Merchan. The prosecution objected to a question from Trump's attorney Todd Blanche about whether Cohen told his wife about the home equity line of credit he used to make the payment to Stormy Daniels' attorney. We also just got news that Donald Trump's attorneys have filed court documents indicating that they will ask New York's highest court to weigh in on the gag order against Donald Trump in his hush money trial. On Tuesday, a New York appeals court denied Trump's latest attempt to end the gag order. The next day, Wednesday, Trump's attorneys submitted court filings indicating that they will appeal the denied motion to the state's highest court, the Court of Appeals. Those filings are not available on the docket. Trump watches as his former personal attorney testifies. Former President Donald Trump has been looking in Michael Cohen's direction from time to time while he testifies. He leaned forward to read the congressional deposition testimony on a screen when it was pulled up, probably to place emphasis on it. So another pretty intense morning in the court. We got a lot of new information from Michael Cohen. Obviously, Todd Blanche is trying to pin him down and make his allegations seem not credible. If you enjoyed this morning breakdown, make sure to leave a like on the video, comment a blue heart, subscribe. Most importantly, have a great Thursday.
Well, Donald Trump's red necktie friends, who Alex was just talking about, came to the Manhattan criminal courthouse this week to praise one of the criminal defendants in the building and to attack District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who Donald Trump falsely accuses of spending all of his time and resources on the prosecution of Donald Trump.
It's for People versus Harvey Weinstein. We are moving forward in that matter. We intend to retry it, and for those of you who were in court saw that the court set sort of a window for a trial in the fall. So we are already moving forward with that matter, having conversations with survivors, centering their well-being, and pursuing justice. We are here now because the work of the office goes on in so many ways. As those of you who cover the office know, the breadth of our work, and that work continues. We have the expertise and resources to take on tough cases while driving down crime alongside our law enforcement partners. That includes, over the past 2 years, driving shootings down 48%.